Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a quiet place where curiosity drifts more slowly than waves and where science is allowed to breathe, settle, and wander. Tonight, we are going to take a long, unhurried journey into a question that sounds at first like legend, yet slowly begins to feel like something more. A question that rests on the surface of imagination before sinking slowly into the depths of possibility. The question is simple, but it lingers in the mind. What if the ocean remembers? It is a delicate thought, something halfway between a whisper and a dream. What if these endless waters that surround us, stretching beyond horizons, reaching down into blackness, are more than just salt and current? What if they are libraries, layered across time, carrying the stories of ages we can no longer imagine? A trick of geology here, a buried shell there, a trail of isotopes carried in the flow. Could each of these be words in a book so large we cannot see its cover? The ocean has always been a mirror for myth, but under its myths, there is something more patient, more grounded, more scientific, and still more mysterious. Every raindrop that falls and every river that drains eventually becomes part of this vast memory. Inside the chemistry of water, locked within minerals, settled into fossils pressed by pressure, Earth has been writing its story for nearly 4 billion years. The pages are not written in language or letters, but in the slow poetry of deep time. Imagine, for a moment, standing by the sea where the air tastes faintly of salt. The surface shimmers, restless, ever-changing, and we are tempted to believe it forgets as quickly as it moves. But beneath that shifting mirror lies a stillness. Sediments gather like dust in an ancient library. Dust from mountains eroding, dust from forests burning, dust from creatures falling silently from the surface into darkness. They fall, they settle, and they do not rise again. They layer, one upon another, until a quiet stratigraphy of memory begins. Could it be that the deepest parts of the ocean are not so much alive with movement, but heavy with remembrance? Scientists speak gently of isotopes, tiny signatures of chemical identity, that tell us of climates long past and oceans that were warmer or colder, saltier or thinner, breathing differently than the ones we know today. With careful study, they can read faint traces of where rivers once flowed, where great ice sheets melted, where life once flowered and then dissolved. Each isotope is a ghost of a former Earth. Together, they create a kind of pale blue diary. And then there are the fossils. Few of us imagine fossils at the bottom of the sea, but that is where much of our planet's memory has found residence. Skeletons, shells, corals, microbial mats, all falling gently into an oceanic sleep. Pressed under layer upon layer over millions of years, they become stone. Some preserve exquisite detail, others are crushed into dust, but each speaks of what once was. Each is a reminder that memory is not only in books or human stories, but in stone and salt, in place and pressure. The deeper we go, the heavier that pressure becomes, thousands of atmospheres pressing against each fragment, against each shell, against each grain of dust. Down here, time itself feels different, as if slowed by the immensity of weight. The ocean floor becomes not only a record but a chamber where forgetting is delayed. Could the immense patience of this pressure be the reason Earth still remembers its earlier selves? Perhaps this is why, when we core down into sediments, we can pull up a timeline stretched over millions of years. Perhaps this is how silence holds memory. But there is something haunting embedded in all of this. Memory always implies loss. For a thing to be remembered, another thing must be gone. The ocean remembers precisely because civilizations have vanished, because forests have drowned, because whole species have dissolved into silt. Fossils are not lives still living, but echoes of lives that ended long ago. Sediments are not mountains still standing, but minerals worn away grain by grain until their ridges faded into the flat expanse of seabed. To speak of the ocean's memory is to also admit the completeness of its forgetting. Whole landscapes, entire histories, swallowed whole, leaving only silent traces. Is it possible, then, that the ocean knows more about us, about Earth, than we will ever know about ourselves? Consider that every transformation of climate, every extinction event, every collapse and adaptation, Every heartbeat of the planet's cycles has been drawn down into the ocean's layers in one form or another. Like the rings inside a tree, like the grooves upon an old record, it is all still there, though we do not yet know how to hear it. Could our species, so brief, so fragile, ever learn to read an archive so vast? And yet, even now, as we try to listen, we are already adding our own entries to that memory. Plastics drifting down like New Age shells. Alloys settling as technofossils. Carbon signatures shifting the chemistry of water. A human fingerprint dissolving into the ocean's pages so quickly that some scientists say it will be visible for millions of years, embedded alongside ammonites and trilobites and algae blooms long extinct. Even when we are gone, some part of us will be folded into that memory, for better or worse, as if we too were a civilization scribbled into the margins of the planet's oldest book. Still, memory is not perfection. It does not preserve every detail. It erases as much as it recalls. In the endless loops of subduction, some seabeds are drawn back down into the fiery crust, erased forever as the ocean floor folds into itself. Stones that once carried extinction ashes or isotopic trails are swallowed whole, and with them, entire chapters of history disappear. The ocean is a librarian who keeps its records by scattering, by hiding, by letting certain stories dissolve into silence. For us, this is a kind of grief. For Earth, it may simply be the way memory works. And isn't that, in a way, how our own lives feel too? We carry fragments of memory, but never the whole. Small details, flickers of light and sound, illusions of permanence that eventually dissolve. Memory for us, as for the ocean, is both presence and loss. Perhaps this is why we feel so drawn to the sea. It mirrors not only the scale of geological time but also the fragile shape of our own remembering. So we are left with the question again, what if the ocean does remember? Not as humans do, not as stories we can tell word by word, but in the chemistry of isotopes, in the silence of sediments, in the fossils pressed eternally into stone. Memory here is slow, too slow to be felt in days or centuries, but unfolding across millions of years. Maybe, just maybe, the ocean itself is Earth's memory, keeping what we cannot. And yet, if memory can survive in water and stone, if fossils can become sentences and isotopes can become whispers, then another curiosity slowly rises. What else lies hidden, waiting beneath those depths? What secrets not of Earth's climate, not of extinction, but perhaps of lives and civilizations we have forgotten entirely? Because if this much can be remembered, this much can also be erased. And if this much can be erased, what else might we have forgotten? If so much of the ocean can be lost, if so many of its stories can be erased or hidden, then perhaps what matters most are not the things forgotten, but the things that somehow remain. And one of the most haunting thoughts we may ever entertain is this: that the water itself, the water that fills the ocean, the water that fills our veins, may be one of the first and oldest witnesses still here, traveling unchanged across the ages. Think about that for a moment. Every sip of water you have ever taken, every raindrop you have seen slide across a window pane, every wave breaking against a quiet shore, they are not new. They are ancient. The very atoms inside a glass of water, the very hydrogen and oxygen that bind to form its droplets, were shaped in places older than Earth, in the furnaces of collapsing stars. Much of the hydrogen in your body, in your veins, dates back to the beginning of the universe itself. It is older than the sun, older than the planets, older even than the oceans that cradle the world tonight. And so when we drink, when we swim, when we sail, we are not moving through something temporary, but something almost eternal. Some scientists believe that much of Earth's water arrived with comets and asteroids, frozen travelers carrying ice across the void in the early chaos of the solar system. These impacts scarred the young planet, yet in their violence they left us something gentle, oceans vast and deep, oceans that would one day cradle life. Others argue that the earliest crust itself, the planet's young, unstable rocks, carried within them hydrogen and oxygen bound together into minerals, eventually released and pooled into the seas. Whatever the source or mixture, the truth remains astonishing. This water, the water around us right now, has been here from the very beginning. Not cycles of centuries, not cycles of civilizations, but cycles of billions of years. And unlike rock, which melts and reforms into new stone, or unlike air, which constantly escapes into space and returns again through volcanic breath, water has an unusual patience. Though it cycles through rivers and clouds, though it shifts between ice and vapor and liquid, at its heart the molecule endures. The ocean evaporates, then rains and flows back again. It rises as snow, it sinks as groundwater, it feeds forests and deserts, it freezes into glaciers, it releases into storms. And always it returns. Always it finds its way back to itself. Some of the very water in your body at this moment may once have flowed through the gills of an ammonite, may once have been swallowed by a dinosaur, may once have frozen inside a glacier when mammoths walked the tundra. Some of it may have even fallen as rain upon deserts where no living eye was there to see it. The thought is humbling, that what feels so fleeting is, in truth, almost eternal. Could it be, then, that we are carriers of an inheritance we barely understand? The salts that flavor the sea, the minerals that have been dissolved from mountains and carried down rivers for eons, may be the faintest echoes of vanished landscapes. Some tiny fraction of the sodium in a drop of water could come from a cliff that no longer exists, could carry the geologic memory of a land that has been gone for tens of millions of years. If we could trace these atoms backwards, if such a map were even possible, what vanished world might they reveal? Perhaps some of the salt in the ocean today once belonged to a river in Gondwana, or washed across the floodplains of Pangaea, or ran briefly through a mountain of stone that has since dissolved completely into dust. And what does that mean for us? That inside our blood, inside every cell, runs this same inheritance. Our oceans are vast, but so too are the tiny oceans within us. The salt water that allows our cells to live, the fluid that carries electric signals of thought and memory through our brains. We are, in every sense, watery creatures. Maybe we forget this because we live mostly on land, but our bodies do not forget. We are made in the same pattern as the planet sees. We are, in a strange and literal way, extensions of them. Perhaps memory is carried not only by stone and fossil, but by the very water that flows through and beyond us. But then comes another question. If the water remembers, what exactly does it keep? Certainly not memory as humans understand it. Not stories or imagery or sound, but perhaps in its persistence, in its refusal to be destroyed, there lies a different kind of recollection. Not a remembering of things, but a remembering of existence itself. The water does not care what lives within it, or what dies upon its surface. It endures regardless, rich with atoms that remain almost unchanged since the cosmos began. Could that endurance itself be called memory? And if so, what does that make us? Fleeting, temporary beings shaped from temporary arrangements of ancient molecules. We imagine ourselves as individuals, yet the water within us has already lived countless lives. Not because it remembers specifically, but because it has lasted. It has outlasted stars. It will outlast continents. It will likely outlast us. Each wave that breaks on a quiet shore tonight may mark not an ending, but a continuation of something unimaginably long. And perhaps that is why so many cultures across time have believed water carries soul, carries origin, carries wisdom. Not only because it nourishes life, but because it outlives it. We sense that something about water is ageless, and the feeling is correct. It does not grow tired when civilizations rise or fall. It does not grow weary when climates swing between ice and fire. It waits, continues, carries forward, and in that carrying, it connects us to every life that has ever been and every life still to come. Even now, as we stand here in this present, water flows in the same endless patience. It falls as rain, sinks into soil, returns to rivers, re-enters seas. It evaporates into clouds only to return again as snow or storm. The same water repeats endlessly, yet never entirely repeats, drifting across places and times. A molecule in the ocean now may have once been frozen at a pole, or drifting in space, or washing across volcanic stone. When you think of it this way, when you stop and let the thought settle, it feels almost impossible to be truly separate from the past. For the past flows through us still. And yet, if the very first drops never left, if the molecules of water endure across deep time itself, then perhaps we must ask, What else in this memory of oceans has survived? What other traces of vanished worlds may still linger, buried not in water's flow, but in the hushed bed of the ocean floor beneath it? If the very first drops of water never truly left, if their molecules have flowed through lifetimes of worlds until they finally reached us now, then what else might endure within the vastness of the sea? Water carries us through time, but the sea also gathers what has been left behind. The bodies, the shells, the vanished remains of life that sank silently into its depths. And over the ages, those remains have been pressed into something more enduring still. Fossils. The ocean keeps its fossils not like trophies, not like decorations, but like quiet words carved in a language we are only beginning to understand. Words written not in ink, but in stone. Far below the waves, in darkness complete and eternal, layers of sediment gather in silence. They drift down grain by grain, settling with patience over the bones and shells of creatures who once swam near the surface or crawled along shallow shores. Over time, those fragments are covered by more sand, more silt, more minerals dissolved from mountains into rivers, until they vanish under weight. What once was living bone becomes rock. What once was fragile shell becomes imprint. What was motion in the water becomes stillness in the sediment. And what should have been forgotten becomes record. In this way, the ocean floor grows into an archive of its own history, curated not by intention but by inevitability. Each fossil preserved below speaks softly for a world no longer here. Trilobites curled as if still alive, ammonites spiraled like intricate galaxies, corals now ghost-white stone, once pulsing with color. What is so haunting is not their detail but their endurance. They outlast the lives they record by millions of years, sometimes hundreds of millions. Each fossil whispers across deep time, saying, "I was here. The world was different. The ocean was not the same." Geologists study these layers like librarians moving through shelves of a library where the books are made of stone. They cut into cores, tall cylinders drawn from the seabed, and see a timeline stretched in quiet rings of sediment. Some layers hold the signs of abundance, where life flourished so greatly that the seafloor is rich with their residue. Others hold emptiness, barren stretches where life sharply disappeared, often at the edges of extinction events. Ash layers show volcanic eruptions darkening skies. Isotopic changes reveal climates shifting with sudden violence or slow patience. Each is a message, but one so large and so slow we can only read small sections at a time. And yet, how many fossils and how many layers must already have been lost? The ocean makes its archive, but it also erases it. At subduction zones, the ocean floor is swallowed into trenches and recycles back into molten stone. Entire epochs are erased, their fossils gone forever, their memories consumed into fire. The ocean remembers, but it also forgets. Its memory is neither kind nor cruel, but partial, fragile, incomplete. Maybe that is what makes each surviving fossil so precious, because it comes to us not by law, but by luck. Not because the ocean chose to save it, but because entropy chose, for once, to delay. What is more, these fossils are not simply records of shapes. They also tell of atmospheres, of changes in chemistry, of entire worlds linked to their time. Scientists trace the carbon locked in shells, revealing how much carbon dioxide once breathed into the oceans, how often the atmosphere cooled or warmed. Oxygen isotopes in ancient skeletons tell us whether the oceans were warm or cold when those lives unfolded, whether the poles grew icy or melted into rising seas. Fossils, in this sense, are not only memories of individual lives, but of climates and changes, of the rhythms of the planet itself. To peer into one ammonite shell may also be to glimpse the state of the whole Earth in the moment it lived. And yet, fossils resist interpretation. They speak in a language at once clear and mysterious. We can measure them, study their shapes, test their chemistry. But what of the lives they once contained, the feelings, the sensations, the movements of the creatures themselves? Those are forever gone. We cannot see the shimmer of their skin, the flicker of their eyes, the way sunlight rippled across their surfaces. We cannot know what silence or sound filled their world. A fossil is not a life, but its shadow. And so the memory the ocean keeps is partial, incomplete, like a photograph with half its light burned away. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to them, holding fossils in our hands as if they might whisper more than they do. A shell fossil feels fragile and weighty all at once. The weight of thousands of centuries, the fragility of a creature's vanished breath. When we touch them, we are connected not only to the animal but to an entire seabed, an entire world now erased. In this way, each fossil becomes more than just evidence. It becomes metaphor, says all things end. But sometimes endings do not end the story completely. The ocean gives us fossils, but it also buries countless lives forever without preserving them at all. For every creature kept, thousands are lost. For every story marked in stone, countless others dissolve silently back into salt and mud. This imbalance is both tragic and inevitable. It humbles us into remembering that memory itself is selective, fragile, imperfect, even on a planetary scale. Perhaps what the ocean teaches us is that preservation is the exception, not the rule. And what survives is precious not because it was the greatest, but because it was simply spared. And so we are left listening in darkness, asking quiet questions. What other fossils remain hidden in the abyss, pressed under kilometers of sediment we cannot yet reach? What vanished ecosystems lie recorded below layers of pressure and silence, waiting for a patient hand to uncover them? Could records of lives we have not even imagined, entire ecologies forgotten to the surface world, still wait in those dark archives of the sea? Or have most already been consumed into trenches, erased into molten stone beyond any hope of return? Maybe not. And yet, the fossils we do have, no matter how few, remind us that the ocean writes its story in stone as much as in water. They are not words we invented, but words we are still learning to translate. Ghostly syllables of a language of deep time, written in bone and sediment, written for no listener at all. Which leaves us with one more lingering thought. If fossils can whisper through the abyss, encoded in stone, then what about the great forces that move the water itself? What if the very currents of the ocean are also carrying memory, flowing like great bloodlines of the planet, repeating their own cycles across millennia? If fossils are the whispers of lives pressed into stone, fragments of memory kept still in the ocean's bed, then perhaps another kind of memory moves above them. Fluid, constant, yet unseen. Not written in layers of sediment, but carried in motion itself. The ocean is not only an archive of what has stopped, but also of what is always continuing. Its currents circle like thoughts, revisiting themselves again and again, looping across centuries, across millennia, across deep time far older than anything we could call civilization. To follow a current is to follow a memory in motion. From the surface, all looks restless, chaotic, waves that rise and collapse, shifting in every moment. But beneath that restless skin lies a hidden order. The earth spins, winds sweep, temperatures slip and lean, and between these forces the water begins to move. It moves with patterned patience, flowing like vast rivers across the planet, not confined by land or contour but by gradients of heat, of salt, of gravity's pull against density. This is the great circulation, the conveyor of oceans, the unseen engine that binds faraway places together in cycles so large they can only be traced across centuries. Consider this. A drop of water may sink in the cold North Atlantic, drawn downward by the dense weight of salt and cold. That same drop may wander through the abyss, riding the deep circulation like a pilgrim across oceans. Centuries later, long after generations have lived and been forgotten, it may rise again into the warmth of the Pacific. These loops are not journeys of years, but of hundreds, even thousands of years. The ocean's flow stretches far beyond our individual spans of memory, moving instead in the memory of the planet itself. To imagine this is to see the Earth not as static, but as breathing. Warm currents carry heat northward, turning winter landscapes into milder places. Cold currents return, sweeping nutrients from the depths up to the sunlit shoals, sparking new chains of life. In this way, currents are not only flows of water but also flows of sustenance, flows of energy, flows of possibility. They are, in every sense, the bloodlines of the planet. And like blood, they carry signals of health and illness, of change and imbalance, of memories written not in stone but in movement itself. Scientists call this circulation the global conveyor belt, a name that humbles us with its scale. It is a process both breathtaking and fragile. For when ice melts too fast, when surface warmth grows too intense, the conveyor wavers. The stability is not absolute. It has stumbled in the past. At the end of ice ages, warming seas sometimes disrupted the flow, plunging regions into centuries of cold even as the planet grew warm overall. Current is memory not just because it carries warmth and salt, but because it carries consequences forward in time, unseen until their influence arrives far away, far later. Could it be, then, that the ocean remembers through movement as much as through fossil? That it keeps record not only in stone pressed silent but in pathways repeated again and again, pathways of water that retrace themselves over eras? Like thoughts recurring through the mind, currents may hold the ocean's most fluid memories, drifting reminders of how the planet's systems have turned before, and how, perhaps, they may turn again. And in this way, the currents also carry other memories. Dust swept from deserts into seas, iron drifting into blooms of plankton, carbon embedded in microscopic shells that fall when their brief lives end. All are carried by these invisible arteries. Even the fingerprint of human activity, carbon dissolving, plastics floating, chemicals crossing boundaries once firm, these too are taken up by currents and shared across hemispheres. Memory, then, is not fixed to a place. It is spread, carried, circulated, dissolving any thought of isolation. Far away places become stitched together by invisible threads of water. But we must wonder, do the currents themselves change over deep time, reshaping as continents drift apart and push against one another? Millions of years ago, the pattern of currents would not have been what it is today. Locked by the positions of continents, guided by tectonic architecture, restricted by passages that either opened or closed, the ocean's circulation has changed as Earth itself has shifted, which means that the ocean's memory is not permanent, but evolving. Like a mind rewriting itself, placing emphasis on some pathways while erasing others, the ocean's heartbeat has shifted across epochs, learning new patterns while old ones sink away. Imagine the emptiness of the abyss without current. Cold, still, cut off. Without circulation there would be no return of nutrients, no slow delivery of warmth, no cycles to sustain. The ocean would become divided, forgotten between layers. Currents blur these boundaries, connecting shallows to depths, poles to equator, past to future. In that endless connection, perhaps, lies the secret of why the ocean still feels alive. Not because of the surface winds, not because of its volume, but because it never stops remembering where it must go. And yet memory, as always, is fragile. Already the deep currents we depend upon are showing signs of slowing, just as they did in long-forgotten episodes of Earth's past. Greenland's ice melts, freshening the salty Atlantic. West Antarctica's collapse pours new layers of cold water into the deep. These changes quietly alter density, the hidden balance that drives the conveyor. What will follow? Perhaps the same disarray seen in the fossils. Abrupt shifts in climate, extinctions, times when silence spread. Or perhaps new rhythms we cannot yet conceive. The currents, after all, do not stop. They only change the paths they take. There is something almost human about it. Not in form, not in thought, but in rhythm. Our own minds curve back to old ideas, tracing thoughts we cannot seem to let go of, repeating loops until they are worn smooth. The ocean does this too, vast, patient loops that can turn a drop of water into a traveler lasting 1,000 years. Maybe the ocean's currents are its memory of the present, always on the move, always repeating, always promising to return. We cannot see them directly from shore, only the hints of their presence. Kelp drifting with invisible force, migrating creatures following lines they do not fully understand, warmth reaching impossible distances from equator to pole. These are small signs of something much larger, a movement vast enough to surround entire worlds. The ocean's memory is not only in what it has kept silent for millions of years, but in what it continues to move, breath after breath, century after century. And so we are left to wonder, if a fossil is the ocean's written word, if a shell pressed into stone is its silent sentence, then a current may be its song. a song we cannot yet hear in full, only fragments carried toward us as the water turns, as the earth shifts, as the future unfolds. And yet, if water itself can carry memory through motion, looping across centuries and worlds, then what of the shorelines it has erased and withdrawn from? What memories linger, not in motion or stone, but in the empty places where once there was sea? If currents are the ocean's memory in motion, then the edges of those currents, where water once was, where it later withdrew, are memories written not in flow, but in absence. The ocean has always been restless with its boundaries. It rises, it retreats, it shifts with tectonic breath and climate's long rhythms. What was once land becomes seafloor, what was once sea becomes plain. Entire coastlines appear, erase, and reappear again, as if the planet were drawing and redrawing the shape of itself with invisible patience. These are the erased shorelines, boundary lines of forgotten oceans that still whisper faintly in scars carved into the land. We often think of the sea as permanent, as if its edges have always been the same, as if the tide's restlessness is limited to its daily pull. But the truth is stranger, wider, more elusive. There have been times when continents lay submerged beneath shallow seas, the waters covering fields and forests for millions of years. Trilobites once crawled across what is now desert stone. Ancient reefs sit high in mountain ranges, stranded thousands of meters above modern tides. Shorelines were once painted across places we now call inland plains, written in sediment that still carries the faint ripple marks of waves long ceased. These are not dreams, but stone traces, real memories locked into cliffsides, riverbeds, and mountain shoulders. You can see it if you know where to look. In limestone cliffs, layered like pages of a forgotten diary, each band once existed beneath water, storing the lives of oceans that no longer exist. You can walk across wave-sculpted rocks far from the tide, where fossils rest in silence, no longer surrounded by the seas that once nurtured them. Each of these fragments of evidence speaks of a shoreline undone, an ocean that drowned the land before retreating slowly again. Could it be that the earth still hums with these forgotten boundaries, that within the bedrock itself there is an echo of every tide that ever reached farther than it does now? The planet reshapes its borders through mechanisms both gentle and catastrophic. Ice sheets wax and wane, locking away vast quantities of water, releasing them again as climates tilt. Tectonic uplift pushes old seabeds skyward while other basins collapse, inviting the seas inward. Sometimes changes happen slowly, over millions of years, so gradual they feel like breathing. Other times they come in rushes, the sudden collapse of ice shelves, the opening or closing of seaways that redirect entire currents, drowning lands that once flourished in air. In every scenario, entropy leaves behind an uneven residue, some fragments preserved, others erased forever. Even today, we live with reminders of past shorelines. The white cliffs of Dover once lay deep beneath warm seas, their chalk a condensation of uncountable microscopic lives. In the American Midwest, beneath prairies and fields, lie limestones rich with oceanic fossils, the residues of shallow seas that drowned the continent nearly 300 million years ago. Across the Himalayas, there are coral remnants, a reminder that what we now call the world's tallest mountains were once the floors of forgotten oceans, pressed upward by tectonic convergence. Everywhere around us, the land is marked by oceans that no longer exist, even if, in daily life, we do not see it. Shorelines, erased yet lingering, surround us still. And yet, if oceans have advanced and retreated so many times, reshaping continents endlessly, what does this say about permanence? Perhaps nothing we walk on is truly fixed. Each valley may have been a bay. Each mountain may have been reef. Each desert may have once hushed beneath shallow waves. Could the very place we stand now have been ocean once? And could it one day be again? If memory is presence of the past inside the present, then the ground beneath us hums constantly with forgotten tides. But memory is not gentle in what it preserves. Each shoreline erased left more behind in loss than it kept in stone. Animals that lived along those vanished coasts, plants that thrived in their soils, entire ecosystems ended when the sea moved. Few fossilized. Even fewer were preserved well enough to speak clearly. And yet the scars of shorelines remain, suggesting the lives that must have filled them. What stories have been forever dissolved into the waves? What civilizations of reef and forest have washed away without a single trace in stone? Each erased shoreline is a kind of partial memory, reminding us of what once was, while silencing all that has been completely lost. There is a haunting rhythm here. Just as the tide rises and falls each day, sculpting small changes on modern beaches, so too over time do greater tides, measured not in hours but in millennia, rewrite the very edges of continents. No line is ever final. The map we know is not fixed, only paused in motion. The ocean may one day reach farther than it does now. It may withdraw, leaving deserts where waters once shimmered. And we, small witnesses within this grand rhythm, will see only the briefest moment of its choreography, never the long sweep of its design. So perhaps when we walk along a modern coastline, we are walking on something far more temporary than we imagine. Waves break, gulls rise, the horizon feels eternal. But it is not. The ocean will leave again. It always does. And when it does, what we know will be erased and drawn again, as it has been countless times before. And this leaves us with a gentle question lingering at the edges of thought. If even coastlines, which feel so solid and so defining, are erased by time, what else is written in the planet only to be erased again? What other layers of Earth's deep history are waiting to be uncovered, hidden not in shorelines or fossils, but deep beneath the silent pressure where time itself becomes stone? If even shorelines, those edges we think of as permanent, can be erased and rewritten by the sea, then what of the places far below, where the ocean does not recede, where it holds its silence for millions of years at a time? There, in the darkness at the ocean's floor, another kind of record is kept. It is neither fleeting like currents nor fragile like coasts, but something heavier, something slower, something pressed by immeasurable patience. In the deep seabed, layers are built one atop another, and with them layers of pressure and layers of time. To descend into the abyss is to travel not into distance, but into pressure itself. With every 10 meters we sink, another atmosphere settles upon us, the weight of air compounded with the weight of water. By the time we reach 1,000 meters, the pressure is enough to crush steel. By the time we reach the Hadal trenches, kilometers deep, it is equivalent to mountains pressing from above, forcing everything into stillness. And yet life persists, but just barely and differently, while the seabed itself transforms into a kind of diary. Every grain of silt that falls becomes compressed into place, written into stone by the slow script of weight. Over time, what looks like plain mud becomes archive. Beneath this weight, time behaves differently. Processes that would take years at the surface seem frozen here, slowed by cold and absence, stretched across millennia. Shells that would shatter on a beach remain intact for impossibly long spans. Isotopic signatures, traces of oxygen, carbon, sulfur, are sealed into sediments like chemical signatures of past atmospheres and climates. With patience, we can read them. Isotopes tell us when oceans were warmer, when ice lay heavy upon the poles, when bursts of volcanic ash changed the composition of the air and altered life forever. In this way, the ocean floor is a timekeeper, but its clock does not tick with seconds. It turns with layers, compressed by silence. And what an unsettling thing pressure is. It not only preserves, but also erases. Some bodies sink into this world of weight and are preserved as fossils, delicate and astonishing. Others dissolve under the same forces, broken down into nothing but minerals dispersed into the surrounding sediment. Entropy does not stop here, it only slows, plays differently, writes in a slower hand. The seabed shows us that memory is always contested by forgetting, that even the deepest records are not sacrosanct, but vulnerable. Pressure can preserve, and just as easily it can destroy. Imagine a whale falling through the water column, its body carried down into silence. At the surface, such a life was immense and powerful, but below, under the weight of time, that body becomes ecosystem, then bones, then dust. Over tens of thousands of years, its material is pressed deeper into the seabed, mingling with shells, with silt, with atoms once pulled from the air in photosynthesis, with dust carried across oceans by wind. Soon, there is no discernible body, no shape, only layers. Memory, in this case, is present but fragmented. Not a single story, but many braided across time. What is haunting about these layers is that they do not belong to one epoch alone. Within a single core of ocean sediment, pulled carefully from the abyss by scientists, there can be traces of countless worlds. Extinction layers from comets or eruptions, quiet stretches of abundance when life flourished, sudden shifts in isotopes when Earth's climate toggled between warmth and ice. The ocean floor does not record time linearly, as we prefer to do. It records it as pressure, folding moments on top of one another, compressing entire epochs into a thickness no wider than a fingernail. Our minds think of history as sequence, but the seabed teaches us that history is sediment, all things piled together, each press of pressure altering the story below. Sometimes those layers are carried downward still further, drawn by the immense conveyor of tectonics into subduction zones. There, the seabed itself dives back into the earth, carrying its diary entries into fire. Whole archives are erased in an instant, entire seas folded into oblivion, their isotopes and fossils melted into nothingness. Perhaps this too is a form of forgetting, necessary, cyclical, woven into the way Earth remembers and forgets itself. Some memories are not meant to last. Others are meant to disappear, making room for new ones to settle in place. Could it be that the planet itself knows to balance remembering with forgetting, preserving only fragments, erasing the rest into silence? And then there is the haunting possibility that the seabed remembers things we have no words for. Not just extinctions and atmospheres, but moments we cannot yet translate into human terms. The isotope signals that feel like whispers in chemical code, pointing to periods when the ocean acidified or when strange oxygen fluctuations may have suffocated whole ecosystems. Some geologists suspect that such shifts have been the hidden stagehands behind almost every mass extinction. The seabed holds those moments still, compressed in minerals, waiting for our translation. But what if much of it will never be translated, or worse, what if much has already been erased forever, pressed beyond recognition under the weight of ages? The deeper one looks, the more the seabed appears not as a static library but as a breathing one. Time is not simply kept here, it is actively rewritten. Layers above crush layers below, altering their shapes. Chemical reactions slowly creep, changing the data inscribed in isotopes, altering the signals we try so patiently to read. Even preserved memory shifts with pressure, never entirely stable. What we study may not be identical to what was first recorded. Time edits itself. Memory expresses itself imperfectly. And maybe this imperfection is not failure, but part of what it means to remember at all. To think of the seabed is to think of ourselves in long patience. We often imagine memory as immediate, images and impressions fresh in the mind. But here memory is wait and silence. Memory is repetition and erasure. Memory is slow sediment gathering in unseen archives. If water is always moving and forgetting nothing, then the seabed is where water's movements eventually stop, pressed into stillness, into density, into deep time storage. It is the Earth's hidden diary, handwritten in mud, rewritten by pressure, always partial, always incomplete. And yet the thought lingers. We do not know what secrets lie buried in those miles of prehistory, silenced under impossible weight. How many civilizations of sea, not human civilizations but ecosystems and biomes we cannot imagine, are buried beneath quiet stone? How many forgotten experiments of nature's patience lie entombed forever, their details erased but their essence folded into the chemistry of stone? Perhaps if we listen more carefully and read more carefully, the seabed may yet reveal memories that stretch beyond extinction, beyond silence, into the unknown. And still, one more curiosity rises. If layers of pressure and time can preserve and erase so capriciously, then what about the waters lying not above, but beneath that stone? What might be hidden in the ocean that exists below the ocean itself? If pressure and silence preserve fragments of time in the seabed, then what lies below those archives, deeper still, beneath the stone itself? It seems impossible that anything more could be hidden. Yet the Earth is never finished folding its mysteries. We imagine the ocean as a boundary, the lowest place life can go before it meets rock. And yet, beneath that rock, there is another sea. An ocean beneath the ocean, quiet, unseen, waiting in the pores of stone. Its memory far older than any shoreline we know. This hidden ocean is not like the one above. It does not ripple, it does not wave. It is trapped in microscopic pores of rock, locked into crystal lattices, unable to rise or fall, unable to storm or still. And yet, its quantity is immense. Some geologists believe that within the mantle, layers of minerals like ringwoodite may hold vast reserves of water. So vast that, if freed, it could rival or even exceed the oceans that dominate Earth's surface. Imagine that for a moment. A second sea held inside the body of the Earth. Unmoving, unseen, carrying a memory written not in currents, but in the silence of entanglement. How long has it been there, sealed away? Perhaps since the very birth of the oceans themselves, when water seeped into the crust and was absorbed into minerals during tectonic creation. Perhaps it is older still, a relic of the very formation of the planet, a record of primordial oceans from Earth's first epochs, hidden away while surface seas were erased and redrawn. Could this hidden water still contain the chemistry of ancient worlds, undisturbed by the changes that reshaped air and surface over billions of years? It is eerie to think of oceans so vast, present and invisible at once. Oceans that do not reflect sunlight or sky. Oceans that do not roar or whisper. Oceans that cannot be sailed, only imagined. Yet their presence changes everything. Locked in stone, they influence tectonics, lubricating the slow drift of continents, shaping earthquakes, even fueling the same volcanic arcs that build islands. It is as if the ocean beneath the ocean has been breathing quietly with the planet all along, guiding the surface from below. Is it possible, then, that the true memory of Earth's oceans lies not in fossils pressed into sediment above, but in the locked-away waters beneath? Water that has never evaporated into the sky, never mingled with rivers, never touched by sunlight at all. If memory is survival across time, then perhaps this hidden ocean is Earth's oldest keeper of memory, a witness sealed inside itself. There is something strange and beautiful in imagining memory carried by water that no one has seen, by seas no life has swum. Oceans locked not only in stone, but in oblivion. They remind us that history may not always be visible, even if it is present. That profound things can exist without ever being named in myth, or charted in story, or touched by exploration. They remind us that the planet hides as much as it reveals. And yet, what would happen if these buried oceans were freed? If tectonics or upheavals, shifts in crust or mantle, someday release them back to the surface? Perhaps entire continents would flood. Perhaps salinity would change. Perhaps the chemistry of oceans would reset in ways unimaginable. Maybe life would be forced to rewrite itself entirely, reshaped by the return of waters that belong to forgotten worlds. This may never happen, or it may be inevitable. After all, every system on Earth eventually cycles. Every layer, no matter how hidden, eventually surfaces again. There is humility in this realization, that when we look out across the surface sea, thinking we see all there is, we are in fact only watching the shallowest layer of Earth's water. Below us, in silence and darkness, there is more. Oceans tucked into mantle stone, moving in secrecy with tectonic plates, rewriting the architecture of Earth while we remain unaware. The ocean beneath the ocean is not metaphor alone. It is a reminder that most of what exists does so beyond our sight. And maybe in that hiddenness there is another kind of metaphor after all. For we too hold unseen oceans within us. Oceans of memory unspoken. Oceans of thought locked far beneath the surfaces we present each day. What if the Earth and we are not so different? Both carrying archives of memory beneath visible layers. Both pressing silence deep inside ourselves. Perhaps this is why we find such comfort in these thoughts at night, when we, too, sink into depths of memory not always spoken, not always known. Still, one cannot help but wonder what else is hidden in the Earth's mantle sea. Could molecules trapped there contain traces of atmospheres long vanished? Could they hold isotopes from volcanic eruptions that reshaped the planet before life began? Could they even, in some strange form, carry whispers of the very origin of water itself, from comets, from rocks, From processes that gave birth to oceans before Earth's face was cooled? Maybe, maybe not. But the possibility alone feels like a hum in the stone, a resonance between what is seen and unseen. And if so much can be hidden here, if entire oceans can vanish underground, waiting in minerals, then what else might still remain in silence, sleeping just beyond our perception? What else has Earth folded inward, where we cannot see, but where the memory endures regardless? And yet, even as we imagine these hidden waters, our curiosity drifts upward again, to the signals that do reach us from the visible ocean. Not locked in stone, but written in isotopes and chemistry, subtle codes of cycles we are only now beginning to decipher. Could the ocean's chemistry be, in its own way, another archive, another compass of time? If the ocean beneath the ocean holds secrets in silence, then the ocean we can touch and taste tells its story in a different way, through patterns invisible to the eye, woven into chemistry itself. Not fossils in stone, not layers pressed by pressure, but subtler clues suspended in every drop of water. Scientists call them isotopes. To us, they are tiny markers, signatures that distinguish one atom of oxygen or carbon from another. To the Earth, they are something more. The faint compass points of memory, coded into molecules, drifting through each tide and each current as if carrying messages from forgotten ages. When you think of water, you might imagine it as simple H2O, a molecule repeated endlessly. But deep within each droplet, differences emerge. A few molecules hold slightly heavier oxygen, a few carry lighter forms, some bind with isotopes that tell stories about ice, about warmth, about rivers and evaporation. To the untrained eye, all water looks the same. To a scientist, water is never identical. Each isotope ratio whispers of conditions when it was formed. A cloud cooled by cold air, ice locked at the poles, or evaporation drawing away lighter molecules, leaving heavier ones behind. Oxygen isotopes, for example, are a diary of the planet's shifting climate. When glaciers spread vast across continents, heavier oxygen becomes trapped in ice, and seawater grows subtly different, a fingerprint of frozen time. When ice melts back into the sea, the balance shifts again, leaving an isotopic trail across oceans and shells. By measuring oxygen ratios in fossilized plankton shells, scientists can reconstruct the rhythm of Earth's ice ages, not by sight, not by memory as we know it, but by chemistry alone. Carbon isotopes speak in another voice. They carry the echo of life's abundance, of forests and plankton drawing carbon from the air, of mass extinctions when ecosystems collapsed, of volcanic outpourings that flooded the atmosphere and seas with greenhouse gas. In times when life thrived, carbon isotopes leaned one way. In times when silence spread, they bent another. In this way, they act as delicate tracers, chemical memories that remain long after the life that created them has vanished. It is astonishing to think that the planet keeps such records so faithfully, that within microscopic foraminifera, tiny shells that once drifted through the ocean's sunlit zones, there remains a full archive of climates millions of years old. Held in their chemical ratios is the memory of ancient warmth when poles were ice-free, the memory of sudden cooling when glaciers surged south, the memory of collapse when entire ecosystems dissolved into silence. Each measurement is like opening a page of a diary, but one written not with words or symbols, written with atoms themselves, waiting for us to learn the language. And this language is not only about eras long gone. It whispers about our present, too. The changes we see unfolding today, increased carbon dioxide, warming oceans, ice sheets receding, are writing new isotopic signatures in real time. Future beings, if they exist, might drill down into sediments and find a sharp line, a clear fingerprint of our age, a testimony to this human-shaped moment in Earth's chemical diary. Just as we look back upon mass extinction markers from 66 million years ago, others may one day look back on the isotope scars we are leaving now. The Anthropocene will not only exist in plastics and technofossils, but also in the very ratios of atoms dissolved into water. But what does it mean to read isotopes as memory? It suggests that history is not only preserved in stone, in fossils that echo shape and form, but also in the very chemistry of matter itself. Memory does not live only in biology, nor in narrative. It lives in isotopes, in elemental variations so small they are unseen, yet so vast they can reconstruct entire worlds. This kind of memory carries no intention. It is impartial, automatic, indifferent, and perhaps because of that, its truth runs deeper. Is it possible, then, that the planet remembers more than it forgets? Not because the stories are clear to us, but because every molecule is marked in some way by the conditions that shaped it. The air we breathe now holds altered isotopic ratios from the burning of fossil fuels, a fingerprint of ancient forests released back into circulation. The water you drink may carry oxygen ratios influenced by long cycles of rain and evaporation, echoing back across countless seasons. We do not notice these whispers, but they are constant, surrounding us, binding present to past. There is another kind of beauty in this. Just like fossils are the shadows of lives stilled in stone, isotopes are the invisible shadows of processes too vast for us to see. They are subtle but omnipresent, everywhere, in every sample, across every boundary. They mean we are never outside of history. Even in the most ordinary glass of water, in the most ordinary breath, traces of past oceans, past climates, past worlds still linger. We are drinking, breathing, dissolving the memory of vanished ages, whether we realize it or not. And perhaps that is why isotopes feel so haunting. They suggest that memory may not need to be conscious to exist. The Earth keeps memory not through awareness, not through intention, but through persistence. Isotopes have no will to preserve, but they preserve regardless. They have no voice, but they speak. They have no story, and yet they become story the moment we learn how to read them. Maybe memory is not always what is kept deliberately, but what simply cannot be erased. It leaves us with quiet questions. How many worlds are hidden in these signatures, waiting for discovery? What futures will be recorded by the isotopes forming right now in seas and snows, in storms and rivers? Could some secrets never noticed by us? Unknown cycles of Earth's chemistry, unknown rhythms of atmosphere and sea, still lie waiting in the subtle differences between atoms, waiting to be heard in 1,000 years or 10,000 more. Maybe not. And yet, if such small variations can hold entire histories, if isotopes alone can contain the archives of climates and extinctions across millions of years, then we must ask what other memories still drift downward, recorded not in atoms but in matter we leave behind. What strange fossils are we, ourselves, now pressing into the seabed? If isotopes are the planet's chemical diary, writing in a script we can barely read, then fossils are its stone-bound words pressed into permanence. But now, in our own age, we too are writing, not in shells or bone or natural sediments, but in something stranger, materials entirely of our making. Plastics, alloys, radioactive signatures, concrete, glass. These will not evaporate like breath, will not dissolve as quickly as ink. Instead, they will sink into the abyss with the same quiet patience as ammonites once did, with the same inevitability as coral reef stone. They will settle into the ocean's deep floor, and in ways we may not want to believe, they will become its next record. They will become the technofossils of the abyss. Consider plastics. They are everywhere, drifting invisibly on surface waves and sinking as fragments into darkness. Microscopic or whole, they are carried by currents until gravity draws them down, where they may rest among ancient shells already turning to stone. Unlike organic matter, plastic resists decay. It breaks down smaller, but it rarely vanishes. Some scientists suggest that in layers of seabed millions of years from now, plastic will form thin but undeniable horizons, much like the ash lines from great volcanic eruptions or the iridium traces left by the asteroid that ended the time of the dinosaurs. Perhaps long after we are gone, future beings, whether human, evolved, or unknowable, will see those horizons as eloquently as we see ammonite spirals today. Clear, decisive, inescapable markers of a moment when something shifted on the planet. And yet, it is not only plastic. Our metals, refined and forged, now drift into the seas as dust, as rust, as entire lost machines swallowed by salt water. Steel ships collapse into reefs. Airplanes lie silent in their final resting places. Alloyed materials, never before formed by natural geology, are slowly sinking down to rest among fossils that evolved without knowing such substances could exist. Concrete too has broken loose from coasts, from harbors, from human hands, and will join them. Glass and cement will become intermingled with coral skeletons and clays. Even the radioactive traces of our nuclear age will persist far beyond us, woven into sediments the way natural isotopes once marked past volcanic eruptions or ancient atmospheres. Could these be considered fossils? Science already suggests yes. Fossils are not only of bone and shell, but of any trace pressed into permanence across vast timescales. Our artifacts, once eroded and buried, fit that definition. And so the concept of the technofossil was born, the physical embodiment of human presence, destined to circulate not as memory in our minds, but as records in layers of stone. A laptop shattered by waves may one day leave behind residues as alien-seeming as trilobites do to us. A simple shard of plastic packaging may last longer than every book or film or story we ever wrote. It is strange to think that the legacy of our age may not be in the memories we desperately try to preserve, but in the materials we did not intend to leave behind. Not because they represented us, but because they resisted decay. Perhaps recognition belongs more to what endures than to what was cherished. And in that sense, our technofossils may become our only true inheritance to the future of the planet. What does it mean for these fragments to lie mingled with natural fossils? Picture this: a plastic bottle fragment surrounded by the calcified remains of a coral colony, a petrified bone from an ancient whale resting near the alloy of a collapsed oil rig, a shell rich with chemical isotopes of an ancient warm sea pressed beneath a horizon touched by radioisotopes from nuclear fallout. These juxtapositions will exist, and for future eyes, they will tell a story as quietly yet clearly as ammonite layers tell ours. They will whisper, "A species lived here, and it left not just life, but mark." Could it be that our greatest monuments are not our buildings, not our satellites, not even our ruins, but instead these fragments pressed into sediment? Our skyscrapers may collapse, our archives may burn, our languages may dissolve, but thin bands of technofossils will remain, retrievable millions of years from now. Perhaps those who someday core the seabed will not find traces of Shakespeare or songs or art, but rather the faint residue of polyethylene fused with volcanic ash, or steel oxide mixed with seashell sands. What memory of us is that? What inheritance? There is humility in thinking of ourselves in this way. We insist on permanence in our stories, our histories, yet the ocean reminds us that permanence does not choose by value, but by endurance. Not because something was meaningful, but because it was resistant to entropy. Our most cherished words will vanish, and yet a plastic fragment will remain. Our most fragile myths will be forgotten, but a concrete block will whisper in stone. Maybe we did not choose the legacy we thought we would. And yet, perhaps this too carries a strange beauty. For the mingling of our traces with natural fossils creates something new. A new stratum where human and earth are intermixed, indivisible, as if our presence was never separate from the geological story. Perhaps geologists of the far future will not distinguish human layers from natural ones, but will write of this moment as one of blending, one of convergence, as though we were merely another chapter of the ocean's slow memory, not an interloper but a participant. Could it be that our technofossils are not marks of arrogance, but simply continuations of the ocean's endless collection of remains? Another flavor of forgetting, another shade of endurance? But of course there is unease too, for technofossils are not passive. Some of their residues change oceans even now, altering chemistry, suffocating ecosystems, rewriting currents in ways fossils of the past never did. Our traces do not only record, they influence. Unlike ammonites or trilobites, our fossils persist before they are fossils, shaping futures even as they wait to be buried. This convergence of the present and future feels fragile, precarious, unresolved. So we drift here, between humility and unease, between permanence and erasure. The seabed is already collecting our fragments, already pressing them into its diary. We are already written into the record, not because we asked to be, but because we could not help it. And perhaps that is the deepest truth. Every species leaves fossils, Only ours are partly of ourselves and partly of what we created to extend ourselves. And yet, if all this must inevitably sink, if our plastics and metals, our alloys and radioactive shadows are already writing themselves into deep history, then what of the abyss itself? What silence keeps them? What weight descends upon these layers where no light ever touches, where memory waits? If our technofossils will rest anywhere, it will be into that silence beyond all storms, into the trenches where memory is darkest and time is most patient. If our technofossils will sink and rest anywhere, they will come to lie in the deepest places of all, where time feels less like a river and more like an endless pool. Beyond the coasts and beyond the continental slopes, beyond the mid-ocean ridges and their volcanic breath, there are still greater depths. The ocean drops into black abysses, trenches so deep they cut into the very bones of the planet. These are the silent archives, places like the Mariana Trench, where pressure is almost unfathomable and light has never once arrived. Here, silence is not the absence of sound, but its burial. Here, memory is not written in cycles of tide or current, but in the stillness of sediments that have lain undisturbed for longer than mountains have stood. To imagine such a place is to imagine a landscape unlike anything on the surface. Walls of stone plunge downward like scars carved into the planet's skin. Temperatures hover near freezing. Darkness is complete. Not just the darkness of night, but the darkness of eternity, where no hint of the sun has ever been recorded. At these depths, every sound is hushed by water, every movement slowed by pressure, and every trace that enters settles into eternity like dust upon an untouched shelf. And yet, within that silence, memory lingers. Layers of silt and ash descend through the millennia, stacking themselves so carefully that they read like thin pages of geologic scripture. The trench is not only a place of depth, but of patience. Mass extinctions have left their shadows here too. Boundary layers enriched with iridium from distant asteroids, horizons of black mud from volcanic winters, sudden thicknesses of fossil plankton killed in waves of climate collapse. Unlike shorelines that erode or tectonic ridges that vanish into lava, these abysses may hold their stories for epochs without erasure. Is it possible that the deepest trenches are Earth's greatest memory vaults? Perhaps here more than anywhere the stillness resists entropy, locking events into place where no storm or current can scatter them. Scientists often lower long, slender coring tubes into these sediments, retrieving columns that look plain to sight but that unfold into planetary histories when read carefully. A few meters of core may contain tens of thousands of years. Deeper ones, pulled from abyssal plains, stretch back millions. Some geologists describe them as time machines, not in the way of stories or imagination, but in truth, the material presence of vanished atmospheres, dissolved into molecules we can measure still today. But not even these trenches are timeless. Below them lies subduction, the slow swallowing of oceanic crust beneath another plate, where stone and sediment descend into fire. Trenches are both the places of memory's longest preservation and also its entrance toward destruction. What lingers here is not eternal, but patiently temporary. Some of what they hold will be carried downward into the mantle, re-emerging one day as volcanic rock far away, their stories melted beyond recognition. What is preserved above may also someday vanish below. Maybe that is the paradox of the trenches. They are both safes of silence and doorways of forgetting. Still, one cannot help but feel a strange reverence toward these places. Perhaps it is the difficulty of imagining them, the way they repel our vision, our touch, even our language. Only specialized machines descend here, thin lights shining briefly before going out again. For the rest of us, these trenches remain a world we can never personally see, only sense in imagination. And imagination, when paired with silence, often becomes something sacred. What else might these abysses hold, waiting in the stillness? We know of the bodies that have fallen, whale skeletons drifting down, fish bones entombed, pieces of continents eroded to silt. We know of the extinction signatures hidden like bookmarks in their layered mud. But what of civilizations erased by waves? What of entire coastlines drowned in ages past, their stones and stories swept down by landslides into eternal night? Could it be that fragments of forgotten cultures, ruins never recorded by history, lie lost in trenches, mingled with the fossils of ammonites and trilobites, destined to wait in silence until tectonics swallows them whole? We cannot know. The trench resists certainty, reminding us with its silence that the planet's memory is deeper than our reach. Perhaps that is the role these abysses play, to restore balance against our certainty, to unsettle the idea that everything can be retrieved. For in silence there is humility. In silence there is surrender. The trench teaches us that not all stories are heard again. Not every era survives. Not every trace is saved. But even so, silence itself becomes part of memory. It is remembered as the space between what is known and what is gone. And when we sit with that silence, letting our minds drift into it, a strange awareness arrives. That the ocean is not only movement, not only chemistry, not only stone pressed by pressure. It is also absence. It is also hush. Its deepest vaults say not what happened, but hold the gap where nothing more is said. And perhaps that too is worth listening to as carefully as we listen to fossils or isotopes, because in this silence, there is an open door for wonder. If the trenches truly are history's archives, waiting beyond light, then what else might linger still, waiting to be noticed? What forgotten pulses of climate, what irregularities of chemistry, what hidden fossils we have not yet imagined? Maybe, maybe not. And yet the silence carries the invitation to ask. And so we leave the trench for now, letting its darkness close gently behind us. But already another question rises like a current. If these abysses have held the deepest stillness of the ocean, then how has that stillness guided the pulsing rhythms above? How has the silence of the abyss written its presence into the heartbeat of climate itself, into the cycles that shaped ice ages and warmth? If silence rules the trenches, then that silence is not empty. It is connected upward, woven invisibly through the body of the oceans, and through them into the body of the planet itself. For though the deeps hold stillness, they also hold rhythm. Not a rhythm we can hear, but one that moves with patience across millennia. It is easy to assume that climate is the work of air and sunlight, of the tilt of planets and the orbit of stars. But in truth, much of it is orchestrated in water. The oceans hold not only movement through currents, not only memory through sediments, but a hidden pulse. A heartbeat quiet enough to vanish from our daily perception, yet strong enough to guide the breathing of ice ages, the expansion and retreat of forests, the long histories of species rising and falling. When Earth cools, it does so in step with the oceans. When Earth warms, the sea is both buffer and amplifier. Deep currents draw carbon dioxide down from the atmosphere, burying it within layers of plankton shells and silts across the abyssal floor. For thousands of years, the oceans store what the sky would otherwise carry, quietly modulating the greenhouse breath of the Earth, slowing change, stretching time. Then, with shifts in circulation, or ruptures of methane clathrates hidden in cold seafloor shelves, the waters release it back, a sudden exhalation into air. Cooling becomes warming, and warming becomes collapse. In this way, ice ages have begun and ended not only by the mechanics of orbits and sunlight, but by the quiet accumulations and hidden releases of the abyss. Geologists find this pulse in the ice cores of Antarctica, but also in the sediments of the deep sea. When they compare the two, they find a dialogue between air and water, each chasing the other, each shaping the other. Sometimes the atmosphere leads, sometimes the oceans shift first, but together they keep time. We might think of glaciers as the outward symbol of these rhythms, mountains of ice advancing across continents and then retreating again, but beneath them lies the ocean's deeper role. For without this heartbeat, without the burial and release of carbon, the planet's rhythms would echo differently, perhaps unrecognizably. The abyss is the hidden metronome to which life's eras keep time. Could it be, then, that climate is less controlled by external forces than we imagine, and more by memory itself? Perhaps the oceans, in gathering carbon and in releasing it, act as vessels of deep patience, responding not only to the gravity of the sun and moon but to their own internal cycles, too slow for human eyes to track. These rhythms are not minutes, not seasons, not centuries, but stretches of thousands upon thousands of years. Time here moves as quietly as dust settling, as gently as a deep heartbeat beneath the skin of the earth. And yet, even slow heartbeats can falter. There are sharp events hidden in the pulse of oceans, sudden interruptions where the carbon balance slipped disastrously. Paleoclimate records tell of intervals known as hothouses, when deep seas released more carbon than they stored, warming Earth into states where no permanent ice could exist. They tell of snowball phases, when oceans locked carbon away so thoroughly the planet froze nearly from pole to equator. Both outcomes, though opposites, were orchestrated in large part by the ocean's chemical balance, by the abyss's ability to hold memory or to surrender it all at once. But how much of this is still a mystery? Is the ocean a passive vessel, simply taking and giving when forced, or is it something more dynamic, a subtle system tuning itself as if aware of stability and collapse? Scientists debate this, searching isotopic signals, looking for links between ocean circulation and carbon swings. What they find are hints, patterns, loops, irregularities, shadows of self-regulation, though perhaps no intention. Maybe the ocean is not deliberate in its memory-keeping, yet it functions almost as if it were. Maybe its heartbeat is not designed, but emergent. And emergent or not, its consequence is the shaping of worlds. We see it even now in present oceans, as they take in a quarter of the carbon dioxide we release into air. Absorbed into currents, locked temporarily in solution, drifting downward into plankton shells. Memory is forming again, a chemical record of our time written not in books or art, but in ratios measurable by future geologists. Already, corals bear signatures of rising acidity, shells thinner than their ancestors. Already, polar waters show diluted salinity from melting ice, readying to alter the rhythm of circulation itself. The ocean does not forget. It records. Every addition, every change in its chemistry, becomes an entry in its slow, patient pulse. Is it possible that one of Earth's great mysteries, a species like ours, brief and curious, altering the atmosphere in centuries, will leave its fingerprints not in monuments, but in this pulse? That our chapter will be visible as a single chemical spike, thin and undeniable, forever embedded in the archives of the sea. And could that spike, like those before it, ripple forward through time into climatic rhythms that reshape the planet long after we are gone? Perhaps, perhaps not. The uncertainty itself is humbling. The ocean's heartbeat is too slow for us to hear directly. We perceive it only in hindsight, only in traces. We live too quickly to stand inside its rhythm in full. And yet, there is comfort in this realization too. For though our time is fast, though our mark feels sharp, the planet's pulse will continue. Just as it has buried and released, just as it has kept slow rhythm over billions of years, so too will it adapt and continue beyond us. Not because we are unimportant, but because the ocean's time is vaster than our vision. Perhaps to imagine ourselves inside its pulse is to remember we belong to a story that neither began with us nor will end with us. But still, the question lingers, what does it mean for memory to live in rhythms we cannot hear? How can we learn to listen to a heartbeat that beats over millennia? And if the oceans themselves have ended and begun climates, expanded and destroyed worlds of ice and warmth, then what histories of civilization, of myth, of human imagination, might already dwell beneath those waters, drowned by their shifting tides? If the oceans hold the heartbeat of climates and the silence of trenches, if they have shaped the great rhythms of ice and warmth across ages, then perhaps it is not only nature they have hidden, but our own forgotten selves. For the oceans have always been both cradle and thief. They nurtured the first life and they drowned the first landscapes. They gifted us coastlines to live upon, and they have erased many of them without trace. The sea is older than memory, and yet, it also holds the possibility of memories erased. Memories of civilizations that once may have walked its abandoned shores, now lost beneath its depths. Myths are the faintest echoes of this possibility. They hum quietly across cultures, across continents, as if remembering even when we cannot. There is Atlantis, lost to the sea in a night and a day, as Plato wrote. Perhaps allegory, perhaps warning, but perhaps also a reflection of memories humanity once knew but later forgot. There are tales of Lemuria, of Mu, of drowned kingdoms from India to Polynesia, each speaking of lands that vanished when the waters rose. Is it coincidence that nearly every shoreborne culture carries some version of this story? Or could it be that they recall an older truth, that oceans have swallowed more than forests or reefs, that they may also have taken whole human chapters with them? Science too reminds us that shorelines are impermanent, and that the seas are more patient than cities. At the end of the last ice age, when massive ice sheets melted, the oceans rose by more than 100 meters. Continents shrank. Valleys became bays. Entire land bridges disappeared. The Bering Land Bridge between Asia and North America, Doggerland connecting Britain to Europe, Sunda and Sahul linking islands into ancient continents. These were not small changes. They were redrawn maps upon which tens of thousands of humans lived. Did their homes, their camps, their rituals slip quietly beneath waves? If they built in stone or carved or painted, could fragments still rest beneath silt in the depths? Geologists have found evidence that suggests people lived on Doggerland before the North Sea claimed it. Rising waters flooded their grasslands, leaving behind the faintest traces of human tools mixed with animal bones beneath the seabed. Along India's coasts, rumors persist of submerged ruins, with sonar hints of ancient patterns lying offshore near Dvarka. Off the coasts of Japan, in Yonaguni, structures resembling stairways and terraces lie underwater, debated endlessly. Are they natural, or the eroded remnants of architecture too old to remember? The science remains unsettled, cautious, but the curiosity refuses to vanish. Could entire stories of humanity, early and fragile, now lie discarded by history in silence beneath the sea? Even if ruins exist, would we ever find them? The ocean resists discovery. Silt buries, currents scatter, pressure pulverizes. Over thousands of years, even stone reshapes under entropy. Wood erodes, metals corrode, fabrics dissolve, leaving behind little but absence. Civilization's traces vanish swiftly under the patience of salt and time. And yet, not always completely. We have found shipwrecks thousands of years old, preserved where oxygen does not reach. We have pulled pottery fragments from seabeds long covered by mud. We have found harbors tilted down into the sea by earthquakes, held in place like silent tombs. If memory resists erasure in some small fragments of artifact, then is it impossible that the same could hold true beneath even deeper waters? Perhaps most of what existed is lost. Perhaps whatever cities or villages, whatever lives once stood there, their traces dissolved long ago. But memory is not always precise. It does not require clear foundations or whole monuments to survive. It survives fragmentary, scattered, in myth and in mystery. In this way, the ocean is not just the eraser of civilizations, but perhaps also their echo. The whisper of Atlantis, the memory of drowned lands, the persistence of myths. These remain because something about their loss felt too large to fully dissolve. Could it be memory's way of living on without form? What is more unsettling is to imagine the scale. Human civilization as we know it stretches back only some 10,000 years in writing, perhaps a little longer in agriculture, a little deeper through artifacts. But anatomically modern humans walked the earth for nearly 200,000 years, and other intelligent species, cousins like Neanderthals and Denisovans, for longer still. That leaves immense gaps into which entire forgotten experiments of culture could have fallen. What if some built settlements near fertile coasts that later drowned? What if some created knowledge or art or symbol that slipped silently beneath the rising tides? It may not have been Atlantis or Mu or anything so grand, but perhaps something real, small or vast, vanished all the same. And if so much could be hidden, what does that mean for what we call history? History may not be the story that happened in full, but only the shards that were spared from water. Stone tablets spared by desert, bones protected by caves, fertile valleys not yet touched by sea. The rest, drowned in silence, locked beyond our reach. Maybe that is why we feel such resonance with the sea. It is not only our source, our cradle, but also our graveyard, the quiet keeper of chapters we can no longer read. Entropy reminds us that almost all things dissolve. Civilizations collapse, languages vanish, cities crumble into dust. And yet, in the ocean, this dissolution feels more complete, as if time erases not only memory, but the possibility of memory itself. Perhaps that is why myths of drowned lands feel so universal, because loss at this scale leaves a wound in our collective sense of continuity, even when the details disappear. The scar remains even if the story does not. Still, one must ask, is it possible that some hint of these lost places still lingers deep beneath us? That if we could sift carefully through layers of seabed, we might one day find the true scale of what has been erased. Future archaeologists may discover relics not far from shelves now sinking. Or perhaps they will find nothing more than scattered stones, worn so bare that certainty will forever elude us. Maybe knowledge of these vanished civilizations is destined to remain incomplete. But even incompleteness carries its own truth. For silence too is testimony. Loss too is evidence. And so we circle back to the ocean's paradox, the way it both dissolves and remembers. It erases details, yet it carries echoes. It destroys, yet it leaves scars in myth and stone and subtle memory. We may never prove Atlantis or Doggerland or Yonaguni, yet the faint possibility that beneath us, beneath tides and trenches, there rest stories not yet known, continues to stir our imagination. Perhaps that is all the ocean asks of us, to wonder what else may have been, and to listen for the silence in which it lingers. And yet, if myths remain only faint echoes of drowned lives, if silence itself holds traces of what was, then perhaps we must consider the deepest truth of all. That even when civilizations are erased, what endures in the ocean is not their monuments, but their dissolution, the slow entropy pouring into salt and silt. What if, beneath legends and myths, the sea's truest memory is not what it saved, but the act of forgetting itself? If myths of drowned civilizations remind us that the sea erases as much as it remembers, then perhaps we must face the truth that memory itself is always contested by entropy. Nothing lasts forever, not stone, not story, not identity. Everything that enters the ocean, whether mountain dust ground by rain, or shells pierced by currents, or whole empires spilled into the tide, slowly dissolves. And yet, the ocean does not simply forget. In its own strange patience, it allows certain patterns to linger, as if reminding us that though all things crumble, not everything is lost. Entropy rules the ocean as it rules the universe. Rocks weather grain by grain, rivers carry sediments to the sea, and currents spread them thin across the abyssal plain. The tallest cliffs collapse, the strongest stones fragment, the most intricate corals become powder. Over time, all structure seems condemned to dissolve into sameness, into mud. Nothing resists the patient pressure of salt and weight and chemical reaction. But just as time erases, it also writes. Just as everything falls to dust, some of that dust becomes history. The paradox of entropy is not only destruction, but transformation. Consider the shells of tiny plankton drifting in the upper oceans. Millions live and die each day, raining down into darkness in what scientists call marine snow. Alone, each fragment is fragile, a skeleton too fine to resist pressure for long. And yet, when multiplied across eons, when layered and compressed, these delicate shells become limestone cliffs, chalk beds, mountain ridges lifted from seabeds into air. What looked like dust became record. What seemed like silence became continuity. Is it not strange that the patience of the sea allows even the faintest particles to still echo across millions of years? The same is true of isotopes. They shift and scatter, dissolved into waters, exchanged through shells and corals and sediments. Entropy should reduce them to chaos, but instead patterns emerge. Ratios of oxygen and carbon line up in repeating cycles, aligned with the ages of ice and warmth. Entropy does not erase their message, not completely. It translates it into chemistry, into quiet signals hidden in mud. To the planet, this is memory. To us, it is evidence that even in endless dissolution, order can persist. Could it be that the sea resists total forgetting? That within the flow of entropy, it finds a way to keep fragments intact, enough for us to look back and glimpse what once was. Broken shells become language. Dissolved minerals become archives. Even silence holds texture, grooves carved by vanished events. Perhaps that is why we feel awe when standing at an ocean cliff marked by fossils, or holding a simple stone imprinted with the shape of a long-dead creature. It is not the fossil itself that astonishes us, but the reminder of resistance, that memory can survive where it should not. At the same time, we must accept that most things are erased. Entire mountain ranges have already dissolved into the ocean and vanished into sediments. Civilizations we will never know have been erased not by war or fire, but by the patient gnawing of tides. All identities, fish or coral or human, are eventually returned to salt. If memory remains, it is fragmentary. And so the ocean teaches us humility. It remembers not because it intends to, but because some things resist entropy long enough to be preserved. Not because they were greater, but because they were already entwined with the chemistry of survival. What if our own fate is bound to this same rhythm? Perhaps one day, our cities too will collapse into dust, our monuments into powder, carried away by the sea. Perhaps little of who we are or what we thought ourselves to be will endure. But scattered fragments, plastics, isotopes, hardened alloys, will remain, not as chosen memory but as accidental testimony. It is sobering to realize that the legacy of a species may not be its art, its thought, its story, but its debris, the things entropy could not fully dissolve. And yet, maybe this realization offers comfort. For it means that nothing disappears into absolute absence. Dust settles, signals linger, silence still hums with the residues of what passed. Memory, we come to understand, is not permanence. It is survival of fragments. Not all, not most, but some. And from those few traces, whole worlds can be imagined again. Perhaps history itself is only ever this: the reimagining of fragments, the weaving of continuity from what entropy has spared. In the deep patience of the sea, time persists as an eternal balance between loss and pattern. Too much erasure, and the present would stand unrooted, untethered to anything past. Too much endurance, and the planet would drown in clutter, unable to evolve. The ocean stands between these extremes, dissolving constantly, preserving selectively. Not because it chooses, but because patience demands it. Maybe this, too, is wisdom, the kind that belongs not to humanity but to the earth itself. So we can ask ourselves, softly, in the quiet of this thought, is forgetting really failure? Or is it part of memory's work, to pare down, to refine, to leave behind only what is necessary to carry forward? Maybe all the identities we fear losing, all the memories we cling to, are destined to dissolve, becoming patterns instead of persons, signals instead of stories, chemistry instead of language. That does not mean they vanish without meaning. It means their meaning changes, perhaps into something broader, something more eternal. The ocean, in its silence, reminds us of that everything dissolves, but not everything is lost. That out of dissolution comes the faint hum of continuity, the fragile rhythm of lingering fragments. Memory is never whole. It is always ragged, but still it endures. And yet, if even broken shells and isotope ratios can persist within endless tides of entropy, then what of the thin, vulnerable layer of life still covering the ocean's surface? How fragile is that brightness above, resting on all this silence, patient but precarious, poised between flourishing and erasure? If entropy and the sea's patience remind us that everything dissolves in time, then life itself appears as a brief shimmer stretched over that dissolution, thin as skin, fragile as breath. For above the depths, above the silence of trenches and the weight of sediments, there is a ribbon of brightness, a glowing film of existence hovering on the surface of the abyss. Compared to the mass of water it covers, life is astonishingly shallow. The sunlit layer reaches down only a few hundred meters at most, a mere sliver across kilometers of depth. And yet, it is here that the ocean blossoms, here that photosynthesis takes hold, here that the delicate machinery of life unfolds. From afar, the sea looks infinite, seamless blue wrapping the planet. But beneath its skin, light barely touches. Only the upper film carries warmth, energy, and color. Within this piece of ocean so thin you could almost mistake it for an afterthought, plankton bloom in uncountable numbers. Whales rise to breathe, fish school in glittering spirals. Above, birds trace shadows on ripples. Below, currents draw nutrients upward. And all of it is precarious, dependent on balance. A balance long maintained, but never guaranteed. The ocean's thin skin of life is not its predominant state. Below it, darkness reigns. Kilometers of water stretch downward into silence where no light nourishes, where creatures cling to survival in forms strange and ancient. Compared to this vast volume of dark water, the photic zone, the lit zone, is barely measurable. If the ocean is the planet's body, this skin is its single, glowing breath. What does it mean that so much of Earth's awareness, our perception of waters filled with creatures, is only veneer? Just a sliver, balancing above unending night? And yet, this thin film shapes everything. It shapes climates, releasing oxygen, drawing down carbon. The plankton within it are so prolific that their annual bloom rival forests, their shells settling into sediments that one day become stone, their chemistry altering the cycles of atmosphere and ocean together. When they die, they drift as marine snow toward the dark, feeding abyssal life. Thus, the world beneath depends entirely on the thin ribbon above, patiently awaiting the endless rain of fragments from sunlit life. Without this epidermis, the abyss would starve, oceans would stagnate, and the planet's balance would collapse. There is fragility here, but also resilience. For hundreds of millions of years, this thin skin has persisted through extinctions, through upheavals, through asteroid impacts and volcanic winters. Its specific creatures shift, new lineages rising while old ones fall. But the phenomenon itself, the gathering of life to meet sunlight, to breathe, to multiply, to feed both themselves and the worlds beneath, remains continuous. It is as though this skin of life is not a detail of Earth, but one of its fundamental expressions, as essential as tectonics or currents. The planet carries memory through fossils and sediments, but perhaps more profoundly, it carries memory through pattern, through the persistence of this luminous veil. Could it be that life itself is the ocean's way of remembering the sun? For the deeper waters are blind to it, closed off from its warmth, without chemistry to capture it directly. Only at the surface can water hold the imprint of light. Plankton, corals, seagrasses, they are records of sunlight transformed into form. Each cell a memory of photons captured. Each reef a diary of energy received and stored, then passed on. In this way, the skin of life is more than fragility. It is a bridge from star to abyss, from light to darkness, from energy into history. And yet, when seen against deep time, the skin feels temporary. Extinction events have swept across it again and again, wiping out entire systems. The end Permian collapse destroyed nearly all marine life within it, a silence that lasted millions of years before rebirth began. More recently, warming oceans shifted this skin, altering how nutrients flow, changing the creatures who flourish and those who vanish. It is delicate, easily imbalanced, sensitive to subtle shifts in acidity, in current, in chemistry. Its memory, though powerful, is continuously tested. Could its persistence be the most fragile kind of endurance, enduring only because it has learned to collapse and rebuild over and over again? We, as brief witnesses, live entirely within this skin. We fish its waters, swim in its shallows, build our lives beside its shifting edges. To us it feels infinite, permanent, as if the ocean's brightness has always existed this way, always filled with whale song and coral reefs and shoals of silver fish. But in truth, it is always provisional, always reforming under entropy's hand. Who can say what this thin layer looked like 10 million years ago, or 50 or 100? Who can predict what it will look like 10 million years hence? Will it remain green with plankton, filled with schools, resonant with whales? Or will it change again, into something unfamiliar, stranger, perhaps simpler than what we know? And so, the thin skin of life humbles us. For though we measure the oceans by their depths, by their volumes and vastness, their true presence lies in this delicate layer above. It reminds us that vastness does not equal abundance, that depth does not equal life. It is fragility, the thinnest breath stretched across endless dark that sustains life on Earth. Perhaps that fragility is the truest lesson of the seas, that survival depends not upon what is strongest, but what clings delicately, even precariously, upon conditions always in motion. And when we listen to this thought long enough, another question emerges quietly beneath it. If the ocean's living skin can be so thin, so ephemeral, yet still endure across extinction and time, what other fragile memories might the planet be keeping in places we have not yet thought to look? Could there be forests drowned, entire worlds suspended, waiting as echoes within the depths, just as delicate but just as persistent? If the ocean's thin skin of life is fragile and fleeting, then just beneath it are ghosts of another kind of fragility. Not marine plankton or shoals, but entire worlds that once belonged to air, drowned and silenced beneath the shifting edge of water. For hidden beneath waves and sediments lie ancient forests, petrified trunks frozen in place, river valleys cut by streams no longer flowing, and cliffs sculpted by rain before they were consumed. These drowned forests are not merely curiosities. They are forgotten chapters, small fragments of land that remind us the planet has forever been rewriting itself, exchanging Earth for sea, silence for life. It feels uncanny to stand on a modern beach and imagine that beneath the very water stretching outward might still remain tree stumps, rooted in soils formed when no tide ever reached them. Some of these forests, discovered along coastlines after storms sweep away sand, still bear the rings of time within their trunks. Rings that once recorded years of sunlight and frost, lifetimes of animals moving between their roots, eras when air carried different balances of carbon and oxygen. To touch them is to touch a memory submerged, a land that did not vanish slowly into desert or dust, but abruptly into waves. The causes of these drownings are many, and they stretch across deep time. Some were victims of glacial melt, when oceans rose hundreds of feet to reclaim valleys and plains. Doggerland, once connecting Britain to Europe, likely held sprawling wetlands and woodlands where humans hunted and thrived. All of it drowned, erased beneath the North Sea when ice receded. Other forests slipped into lakes that grew into seas, or were pulled downward as tectonic plates shifted, dropping coastlines until the tides overtook them. Each origin story differs, but all point to the same truth. Nothing stands still. Shorelines creep, seas transgress, rivers vanish, and all that flourished upon them is eventually buried. And yet, the ocean does not only erase. It often transforms. Some forests, instead of rotting away, fossilized. Minerals seeped into their tissues until bark and grain became stone. These petrified groves are no longer alive, but they endure, testimonies to forests that once touched the sky. In other places, soils beneath the seabed still carry fossilized pollen, tiny grains from vanished ecosystems. Microscopes reveal them like ghosts of flowers once blooming where now only fish drift. Drowned forests whisper in stumps and in sediments, offering glimpses into lives erased but not gone entirely. But what if there are forests that drowned not millions of years ago, but only thousands and still lie largely intact? What if rising seas after the last ice age submerged whole woodlands before human eyes, leaving their remains as layered memories beneath modern tides? Could some of these drowned worlds even hold evidence of the people who walked them, whose fires and tools and voices washed away with the forests themselves? We cannot know for certain, but the possibility adds weight to the silence that surrounds them. Entropy waits for all things, but drowned forests often resist its full erasure. Mangroves preserved in salt, trunks hidden beneath silt, caves flooded and sealed away, all hold surprisingly fragile yet resilient marks of a vanished past. Scientists drilling into submerged soil sometimes recover layers still carrying organic faintness, ancient lignin, fragments of once living tissue. It is haunting to think the ocean, while endlessly dissolving, occasionally acts as a preserver, freezing a landscape mid-breath only to bury it for millennia. And still, the forests remind us of absence as much as endurance. Each trunk found waiting beneath waves is not only evidence of life past, but evidence of loss, a reminder that every stable home is temporary. The land we stand upon now may not be land forever. In ages to come, Perhaps our own fields and forests will drown too, their roots swallowed, their remains settling to join the endless archive of drowned worlds already resting below. Maybe the Earth's greatest lesson is that nothing belongs entirely to us, not even the ground beneath our feet. Could it be, then, that the presence of these drowned forests shapes the myths of loss we carry? That dreams of Atlantis or stories of lands reclaimed by ocean echo real memories of forests fading beneath rising seas? Perhaps, deep in our collective memory, there is awareness that coasts collapse and water does not forgive stability. Forests that once cradled us are still whispering, still shaping our sense of the impermanence of place. When we see them, rarely, briefly, as storms expose them, it feels like seeing another world for the first time. Water pulls back like a curtain, and beneath it lies not coral or shells, but familiar trunks, familiar grasses, familiar outlines of roots we did not expect. The uncanny feeling is this: beneath the sea rests an image not alien, but intimate. It is our world mirrored back, our trees, our soils, drowned in silence. Such glimpses comfort and unsettle in equal measure, inviting us to imagine both what has been lost and what may be awaiting us ahead. And perhaps here we sense time differently. Drowned forests remind us that memory does not only drift forward through what we preserve, but also backward, through what lingers beneath. What does it mean that trees which once stood in open air now rest like statues in darkness, waiting beneath centuries of tide? What does it mean that pollen from vanished flowers still exists in sediments, a trace of color we will never see again? Memory lives even when altered, even when drowned. The planet keeps fragments not despite drowning, but because of it. And yet, one more thought rises with the tide. If entire forests can be drowned and held, if rivers that once carved valleys are now hidden beneath waves, then what other histories are hidden with them? What other echoes, human or older still, wait drowned beneath the silence of the sea? Perhaps forests were not the only thing taken. Perhaps memory, across scales far larger and stranger, waits deeper down, recorded not in trunks or pollen, but in sudden breaks where extinction itself left its marks. If drowned forests remind us of fragile worlds lost beneath water, then deeper still lie losses greater than forests, greater even than any single species. For in the ocean's sediments there are layers not of gradual change, not of drifting transformation, but of silence so abrupt it echoes across eternity. These are the markers of extinction events, sudden thresholds where an abundance of life gives way to absence, where one heartbeat of evolution stops and another begins. They are memories pressed in stone, waiting quietly where the ocean has kept them, layers of ash and silt bearing witness to the vanishing of worlds. Scientists studying ocean cores speak almost reverently about these layers. They sit there, often thin as a band of ink, nestled between countless strata of ordinary time. Above, life's steady rhythm. Below, the record of vanished seas. Within, a heartbeat of catastrophe. The Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, when a comet struck and ended the reign of the great reptiles, is etched into sediments across the globe. A layer impossibly thin, rich in iridium, a metal rare upon Earth but common in asteroids. It marks a single day when the skies darkened, the seas boiled inward, and life itself folded abruptly into silence. Not just the dinosaurs fell, but vast ecosystems of plankton, ammonites, corals. The ocean's memory keeps them all in that sharp boundary, a line that will remain for hundreds of millions of years. And there are others. The end Permian extinction, often called the Great Dying, is written across sea floors older than mountains. Ash, black mud, disrupted isotope signatures. All speaking of oceans deprived of oxygen, circulation slowed, waters poisoned by volcanic carbon spilling endlessly into the air. Almost all life vanished, 9 in 10 species silenced. Yet still, the ocean remembers in its deepest archives, in bands of carbon-heavy stone, in fossil gaps where abundance suddenly ends. Life rewove itself eventually, but the absence remains, a silence within the continuous song. Could it be that the ocean is where extinction is best remembered? On land, erosion destroys, mountains uplift, deserts scatter the evidence. But on the seabed, Sediments fall and cover. Time presses them into place, and memory stays. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough to reveal the shape of catastrophe. Enough that we can still look back across deep time and say, here, in this thin dark line, the world ended, and something new began. What is haunting is the thought of scale. These events are not rare moments. They recur like pulses through the rhythm of the planet, sometimes caused by fire, sometimes rock falling from the sky, sometimes the Earth itself turning against its own patterns of chemistry. The fossil record counts at least 5 major extinctions, each leaving its scar in both land and ocean. And each time, the ocean preserved the scar more clearly than anywhere else. Maybe we could say the ocean carries not only memory, but grief. A grief collected across billions of years, patient, silent, never fully spoken except in the language of sediment. Imagine for a moment standing on a modern beach, waves lapping softly, seabirds crying overhead. It is difficult, almost impossible, to reconcile that such a scene could collapse entirely, that the ocean could grow sour with acid or stagnant from collapsing currents, that creatures filling it with color could vanish. But the cores pulled from the seabed tell us plainly that it has happened, more than once, and always with suddenness. Entire genealogies ended overnight on scales we cannot fathom. What survived did so barely and always altered. In this way, extinctions are not only tragedies. They are also turnings, the Earth resetting its course, stripping the page clean so new patterns may be written. Yet the ocean alone remembers the erased pages as well as those newly written. Could it be, then, that extinction itself is a kind of cosmic memory? That the absence it creates defines as much of the planet's identity as its abundance? We measure time by what survived, but the ocean also holds what did not, what will never return. To place your hand on a fossil ammonite in limestone chalk is to press your hand against a vanished ocean, a vanished world once abundant, now gone. Extinction is loss, but it is also testimony. The ocean makes sure of that. And now, as we read these layers, unease hums quietly beneath the calm, because we realize we are making our own layer. The Anthropocene, not written yet in full but already begun, is pressing its signals into chemistry and sediment. Plastics, carbon isotopes, fossil fuel residues, bones of billions of livestock scattered into soil, perhaps, like the iridium line of the asteroid, or the black mud of Permian volcanism, our markers too will become a sharp boundary in future rock strata. Perhaps one thin horizon will speak of a silence we contributed to, or perhaps only of changes that ripple for millennia. Either way, the ocean is recording already. Already our chapter presses itself into its patient diary, even as we live inside it. But what does it mean that memory is so entangled with silence? That to remember life is also to remember its erasure? The ocean does not judge. It holds fossils and extinctions alike. It does not separate triumph from collapse. It gathers them together, treats life and death with the same patience. Maybe this in itself is the lesson, that extinction is not failure, and survival is not triumph. Both are part of the same rhythm, remembered not by individuals but by the planet itself. Still, it is difficult not to feel the weight of it, to realize that all we know, all we see in daylight is fragile. And yet, in the ocean's silence, after every extinction, life began again, different, altered, reshaped by circumstance, but always beginning again. Extinction, then, is an echo, but an echo that carries forward as much as it calls back. And we are left wondering softly as we drift with these thoughts. If the ocean has held echoes of so many silences, then what of the single grains, the tiny fragments, the slow and steady descent of matter into eternity? What kinds of memory are written not in sudden boundaries, but in endless dust sliding into depth? If great extinctions are sharp boundaries in Earth's memory, sudden silences pressed into stone, then what of the smaller, quieter moments, those that do not end worlds but slowly fill them with patience? Between those catastrophic lines are pages written grain by grain, layer by layer, almost invisible in the moment, but immeasurable in their accumulation. Dust, always falling, always settling, always folding into the seabed. From deserts to oceans, from mountains ground to silt, from ash drifting across hemispheres. The planet exhales its powder, and the oceans receive it. This endless descent of dust feels less like an accident and more like time itself taking form, soft and particulate, reminding us that every grain is both a tiny death and, in some way, a tiny survival. Consider the Sahara, vast desert of wind-sculpted sand and heat. Winds lift its dust into the sky, carrying it outward in plumes so immense they can be seen from space, drifting westward across the Atlantic. Each particle is ancient, a remnant of weathered mountains eroded into memory. They travel thousands of kilometers before they fall like faint, invisible rain upon the surface of the sea. Some grains dissolve into nutrients that bloom into plankton, feeding life at the ocean's skin. Others continue to sink, passing through miles of water before resting upon the abyssal plain, destined to become part of sediments that will one day harden into stone. Could it be that dust is the most democratic of memories, scattered equally across oceans and continents, shared among currents and air? Unlike fossils, which preserve only the rare and the accidental, dust remembers everything, because everything becomes dust. Mountains rising over millions of years, broken again by frost and rain, reduced finally to wandering grains. Forests burned, releasing ash into the stratosphere. Volcanic eruptions sending fields of particulates across the sky, later falling quietly into waves. All eventually drifts downward into the sea. The ocean does not discriminate. It takes the dust of deserts and of forests, of stone and of flesh. It receives all of it, mixing fragments of distant worlds into beds of silt. And in that mixing lies something beautiful. A core pulled from ocean sediment can hold dust from Africa mingled with pollen from the Americas. Volcanic ash from Iceland fused with microscopic shells of plankton. Each layer is a meeting of places that never touched in life, now folded together in memory. Dust carries histories across oceans, connecting continents not by land bridges, but by invisible clouds that drift and settle, always returning to the same abyssal archive below. Over millions of years, these particles build layers of red clay where iron-rich dust oxidized upon the seabed, layers of chalk where silt mingled with shells. At first the particles are soft, loose, scattered like powder in water. But compression, pressure, and time transform them, hardening into stone. What once filled the sky becomes part of Earth's geology. Time written not in fossils, not in extinctions, but in grains so small we can barely see them. And perhaps that is the truest form of eternity. Not the dramatic silence of catastrophe, but the endlessly patient fall of dust into ocean, erasing individuality until only pattern remains. Is it possible, then, that dust is the planet's purest metaphor for memory? Not because it remembers detail, it does not, but because it remembers through accumulation. One grain is nothing, 2 grains are almost nothing, but years and centuries and epochs of grains form mountains, continents, worlds. Dust is memory stretched so thin that only time itself can reveal its story. It survives not because each particle is strong, but because too much falls to ever be erased. And dust carries more than stone. Within its grains, scientists have traced isotopes, mineral signatures, biological remnants, chemical fingerprints that reveal distant origins. Some particles preserve pollen from vanished forests, evidence of climates now gone. Others contain traces of past volcanoes, their eruption dates written into the ash itself. Still others are laden with nutrients, feeding plankton, sparking cycles of life whose shells will themselves become dust again. In this way, dust is a cycle feeding itself, death supporting life, life returning to dust, endlessly repeating, endlessly descending. It feels humbling to imagine how much of our own world will one day join this silent fall. Our cities, our mountains of concrete and glass, will crumble into their own dust, carried on winds, dissolved by rains, spread invisibly across skies before sinking into ocean. Long after language fades, our dust will remain, folded into sediments with desert sands and volcanic ash, indistinguishable yet present. Perhaps this is the truest form of legacy, not monuments preserved whole, but fragments scattered everywhere, blending with fragments of every place and time. Maybe that is why dust feels both so intimate and so eternal. It covers furniture in quiet homes. It gathers in bookshelves. It sparkles briefly in sunlight through a window. And yet that same dust, multiplied by scales we cannot grasp, covers oceans, builds stone, records atmospheres. In every handful of dust lies the paradox of scale, insignificant to one, profound to all. Memory works in the same way, scattered fragments, most invisible, but together shaping who we are, shaping what the planet remembers. The ocean, patient as always, receives this constant drift. It is a drift without drama, without catastrophe, but not without meaning. The silence of extinction events is sharp, but the silence of dust is softer, a whispering background. It does not announce itself. It does not erase in a single breath. Instead, it accumulates until the weight of countless whispers cannot be ignored. Memory is not always explosion. Sometimes it is just the steady fall of everything into silence, one grain at a time. And yet, if dust carries time so faithfully, if even deserts can reach oceans, if forgotten forests and vanished mountains can still fall particle by particle into the abyss, then we must ask, what else falls? What of us, what of our thoughts, our words, our civilizations? Could it be that they too eventually dissolve into dust and drift across the seas, settling into eternity? Perhaps memory, at its core, is not keeping things whole, but letting them scatter until they can no longer be lost. If dust reminds us that everything eventually scatters into the ocean's silence, then what of us? Who are we, if the ocean has seen far more than we ever will, if its memory has stretched longer than every story humanity has ever told? To stand before it is to sense a scale that dwarfs identity. We are singular, brief, made of flesh that dissolves quickly in time's patience. The ocean is enduring, vast, ancient beyond our reach. In seeing our reflection on its restless surface, are we anything more than momentary waves pressed against eternal silence? It is a disquieting thought, but strangely comforting too. We imagine identity as solid, something bound to names, to years, to a sense of self that feels permanent while we're alive. But beside the ocean, permanence becomes illusion. Its depth has watched mountains collapse into silt. It has carried isotopes of vanished climates and dissolved civilizations without trace. It has swallowed forests, continents, entire worlds of coral, then carried on as if nothing changed. Could our identity, compared to that scale, be more like foam dissolving at the edge of a tide, briefly bright, briefly shaped, then gone? And yet, perhaps that is not the full story. For identity may be scattered like dust, but dust gathers again. Just as plankton shells raining down have, over millennia, become cliffs of chalk, maybe we too are folded back into patterns larger than ourselves. Our bodies return to salt, our molecules drift into new life, our presence, though fleeting, becomes part of the greater pattern. Who is to say that identity ends when form dissolves? Perhaps it only expands, merging into cycles that will outlast us by millions of years. Science shows us hints of this. The oxygen in our blood, once breathed by ancient oceans. The calcium in our bones, drawn from shells and stars. Even our thoughts are electrical signals flowing through salt. In essence, currents within water, no different than the currents that circle in the sea. When we dissolve, we return those same molecules, those same elements, back into circulation. Not because we choose to, but because the ocean's patience takes everything back eventually. Could it be that identity is not an isolated flame but a continuation of cycles, repeating endlessly, erased and renewed? And still the abyss asks us another question. If we cannot last as single individuals, if memory of us erodes into fragments and silence, then what is the meaning of the self at all? Are we waves in the abyss, temporary crests, part of a larger ocean? Maybe the idea of identity as permanent has always been our illusion. The truth might be that we are less singular beings, more brief constellations of matter, assembled for a while, shining briefly, before scattering again. Not selves, but moments. Not permanence, but patterns of presence. Maybe this is why the abyss feels so magnetic to us. The silence is frightening, but it also mirrors something intimate inside ourselves. the quiet awareness that we, too, are transient. We live with memory, but memory falters. We cling to self, but self melts. The ocean does the same, endlessly dissolving, endlessly reassembling. It carries identity for entire ages, then erases it without pause. Do we resist the ocean's truth, or do we simply mirror it in miniature? And yet, some part of us aches for continuity. That ache is why we write, why we carve stories into stone, why we build archives and monuments. We try to fix identity against entropy, to make memory stronger than the abyss. But the abyss waits, patient. The ocean does not scramble to preserve, nor does it rush to destroy. It simply allows time to work. What is preserved is chance. What is erased is chance. Maybe memory itself, like identity, survives not by resisting dissolution, but by surrendering to it. Is it possible, then, that the very idea of identity is less about holding on, and more about passing through? A fish is part of the ocean's identity while it swims, a coral reef while it grows, a whale while it sings. When they cease, the reef does not end. The ocean does not pause. Their lives dissolve into silt, but their presence lingers in cycles, in chemical ratios, in echoes. Maybe we too belong more to cycles than we realize, cycles in which identity is not lost, but shifted endlessly into new forms. To think like this is to feel the abyss from within. The ocean does not remember in stories, nor in faces, but in substance. And if we, too, are substance, then perhaps our identity is recorded not in what we think we are, but in what we leave behind, in how deeply we merge with everything else. Our memory, like plankton dust, becomes silt pressed into seabed. Not personal, not name-bound, but planetary. Not who, but what. And slowly, as we drift with these thoughts, a strange calm arrives. To see ourselves as waves, and the ocean as the silence beneath, means to accept impermanence not as loss, but as truth. We are brief, yes, but we are also connected. We dissolve, yes, but dissolution is not nothing. It is continuation in another form. Perhaps identity was always fluid, always shifting, like water itself. But this leaves us with one more question to carry softly forward, one that lingers in the quiet before sleep. If we are nothing more than brief waves against the ocean's silence, then what is the silence itself made of? What is the abyss when stripped of identity, when memory fades, when only emptiness remains? Could even the abyss contain echoes older than oceans, older than the earth itself? Echoes hidden within waters beneath ice, where secrets wait in cold immobility. If we are only brief waves against the deep silence of the ocean, then perhaps our impermanence is mirrored most clearly in places where the sea itself has been frozen into stillness. Not lost, not gone, but locked beneath vast shelves of ice, waiting without movement, without change, for longer than any memory we can hold. These are the oceans beneath ice, waters secluded under kilometers of frozen weight, sealed away since mammoths last walked the land. They are not the bustling surfaces we know, nor the shifting currents we trace, but something else entirely. A patient archive of silence, a memory kept in cold immobility. To imagine such waters is to imagine a paradox. Oceans are life, motion, circulation. Ice is stillness, barrier, enclosure. Together, they create a hidden strangeness. A sea alive in potential yet sealed away in hush. In Antarctica, under shelves thick enough to dwarf mountains, enormous lakes of liquid water lie trapped, kept from freezing solid by the heat of Earth's crust beneath. Subglacial rivers flow slowly through darkness, unseen and untouched. In the Arctic, similar basins lie beneath the Greenland ice sheet, their waters isolated for tens of thousands of years. Each pocket, each hidden sea, carries chemistry uncirculated, microorganisms undiscovered, signals of climates preserved in small containers of time. Could it be that these oceans beneath ice are the truest memory vaults on Earth? For while the surface ocean reshapes itself constantly, mixing within decades and centuries, these entombed waters barely stir. Their molecules have been sheltered from atmosphere, currents, storms, shielded in secrecy across human prehistory, across the rise and fall of civilizations. The water itself may hold isotopic balances reflective of climates we no longer inhabit. It may carry traces of ancient air, sealed in bubbles and mingled into sediments long removed from sunlight. In a sense, they are not only oceans but time capsules still unopened. Scientists drill carefully into these locked waters, searching for clues to life's persistence under extreme restraint. Microbes have been found, adapted to darkness, feeding on minerals carried from rock instead of light. They survive where life should not, a reminder of beginnings that may echo the very origin of life itself. In some sense, these hidden oceans mirror what early Earth may have looked like, before the planet bloomed green with plants or filled blue with light-fed plankton. The abyss beneath ice is a rehearsal of ancient days, and perhaps even a model of what life could look like elsewhere, on icy moons around Jupiter and Saturn, where seas lie hidden beneath frozen crusts. Europa, Enceladus, their stories are whispered first here, beneath the shelves of our own planet. There is humility in realizing that parts of our ocean have remained unchanged while all else transformed. When mammoths drank from rivers, when vast grasslands stretched across the north, when glaciers surged and withdrew, these hidden seas remained. When empires rose and fell, when myths were sung, when human memory found language, the waters beneath ice still waited, sealed in timeless night. They outlast us not by grandeur, not by distance, but by stillness itself. Movement erases, stillness endures. Yet, not all beneath the ice is permanence. These entombed waters shift too, in patience we rarely comprehend. Entire shelves have collapsed in Earth's past, releasing their hidden oceans back into the seas, changing chemistry, influencing currents, sparking climate shifts. If released, these reservoirs do not simply return quietly. They join the wider ocean like forgotten chapters suddenly remembered, altering circulation, dissolving patterns, rewriting balances of salt and temperature. Could it be that when ice melts, it is not a loss alone but also a remembering, a release of waters that carry with them messages of the past, rejoining the present with secrets not meant to stay hidden forever? As global warming presses upon us now, ice retreats, Greenland's cold shield thins, Antarctica cracks. Within these fractures, locked waters are beginning to seep. Some argue they may reshape currents as drastically as any event in human memory. Their chemistry, long sealed, will mingle again with the ocean's pulse. Perhaps our near future will be shaped as much by these ancient hidden seas as by the atmosphere above. The planet does not forget. When ice melts, it is as though locked diaries are suddenly opened, their ink spilling across the world. And so the oceans beneath ice act as both memory and warning. They are preserved stillness, but they are also change waiting to happen. Their silence may be temporary, their unveiling inevitable. Perhaps the identity of the ocean itself includes this pattern of concealment and release. Times when water hides in frozen vaults, followed by times when those vaults collapse, shifting the rhythm of the planet. Memory is not passive. Memory, in Earth's story, eventually returns, sometimes gently, sometimes with the weight of extinction. But in the meantime, their silence hypnotizes the imagination. What would we see if we could stand there, beneath kilometers of ice, within a hidden lake? Darkness complete, no stars above, no sun reaching down. Only blackness, cold, and water pressed into impossible stillness. And yet, trace life would still pulse faintly, a microbial hum older than us, older than memory. It is the strangest thought, that worlds we believe dead may not truly be dead, only hidden. That memory persists by concealing itself, waiting beyond our reach, waiting to be rediscovered when conditions allow. And if that is true beneath our own poles, what about worlds beyond? If Earth can hold oceans beneath its ice for tens of thousands of years, stable and alive, could icy moons hold them for millions? Could memory be written there too, not in sediments and dust, but in the persistence of liquid hidden beneath endless crusts of white? This thought, gentle and vast, suggests that the ocean story is not only Earth's story. Perhaps it is larger, a planetary theme repeating wherever ice and rock meet heat and water. And so, the ocean beneath ice reminds us again of silence's strange role in memory. It is not absence. It is not erasure. It is holding, keeping, preserving until the right moment arrives to release. These waters under frozen shelves may indeed remember worlds we cannot, worlds before us, beyond us, larger than us. And yet, if whole oceans can be sealed alive beneath ice for millennia, waiting in patient darkness, then we must ask softly, what happens to all waters, even those in motion at the surface? Do they not, too, eventually sink, seeping downward under gravity's hand, pulled toward even greater silence? If memory can rest beneath ice, could it also rest forever beneath stone itself, drawn downward into the slow collapse of the seafloor? If oceans can remain sealed in silence beneath ice, waiting in stillness across epochs, then perhaps we must also follow the direction all waters, all dust, all stone eventually take, downward, for the ocean itself is never truly separate from gravity's patient hand. Every grain, every fragment, every mountain peak, no matter how high or resolute, is slowly drawn to the abyss. Nothing escapes this slow descent. Not forests, not valleys, not even the tallest cliffs. Everything is pulled grain by grain, atom by atom toward silence below. It is erosion that writes this story, a quiet, unfailing current as old as the planet itself. Winds carry dust from summits. Rivers grind stone into silt. Rains scoop valleys from rock. Glaciers etch whole mountain ranges into powder as they crawl. All of it is loosened, all of it is carried, and all of it drifts eventually into the sea. From there, the ocean takes over, sorting fragments into its depths, letting them settle in abyssal stillness. The scale is imperceptible from within a single human life, but over ages the process is absolute. Mountains collapse not in explosions, but in whispers. The Himalayas themselves will one day rest as mud upon an unseen floor. It is haunting to imagine that the face of Earth is nothing fixed but a temporary shape pressed against entropy. We look to cliffs as symbols of permanence, as if they stand beyond time. But gravity knows no permanence. It knows only descent, only patience. In millions of years, even those cliffs dissolve, their stories dismantled, their stones pressed into silence. What we revere as eternal landscapes are only pauses in motion, caught mid-descent in the downward pull that will eventually erase them. Could it be, then, that every landscape is already half forgotten, already slipping gently toward memory's darker archive? The ocean floor is where all these fragments gather. Basins fill with sediments delivered by rivers, carried by turbidity currents that rush across underwater canyons, vast underwater landslides pouring debris downward. What seems unmoving on the surface, peaks, plateaus, has been collapsing for ages, feeding the ocean with their remains. It is not devastation but transformation. In this collapse, new formations arise. Sediments harden into stone. Mud lithifies into shale. Sand into sandstone. Over time, this new stone itself is carried downward by subduction, recycled into the fire of the mantle, only to rise again as new mountains, destined to fall once more. Gravity is patient enough to erase everything, but it is also patient enough to build again. Nothing disappears into abyss forever. It circulates, pressed deeper, heated, remade. Still, for us, what matters is not the cycle but the inevitability. Everything we know, all that feels monumental, will be drawn down. Civilizations may carve their names into cliffs, towers, monuments, but the cliffs will not keep them. Rain will blur, rivers will cut, waves will tear, and gravity will press. Silently, without violence, each mark will be carried out to sea. Perhaps identity itself is subject to the same fate. Not toppled suddenly, but worn away, forgotten grain by grain until what was singular becomes indistinct. There is an almost meditative rhythm in this truth. For while extinction events are sudden, and eruptions and impacts loud, erosion is the steady whisper behind everything. It is the long background hum of time itself. Not because it destroys, but because it equalizes. Perhaps this is why valleys feel so ancient, why riverbeds evoke a sense of timelessness. They are memory not written in abrupt loss, but in slow surrender. They remind us that patience is the truest shapeshifter of the earth. Could it be that memory itself follows the same law? We think of forgetting as instant, as moments of disappearance. But in truth, much of memory, personal or planetary, dissolves not dramatically but gradually. We forget not in explosions, but in erosion. Faces blur across decades. Languages fade across generations. Records disintegrate into fragments. What remains are not abrupt silences but softened edges, the outlines of what was, carried slowly downward into time until they disappear from view. And perhaps this is why we find cliffs and mountains so moving. Not only for their height, not only for their grandeur, but because in them we sense impermanence frozen in place. They look immovable, but some part of us feels their collapse already underway. They stand as symbols of strength, and yet every raindrop sliding across them pulls them downward. Every gust of sand-laden wind erases their detail. Mountains are both endurance and disappearance at once. Standing before them is standing within memory's paradox. The ocean's abyss is the great collector of these disappearances. It spreads wide its plain and gathers everything eventually. Bone and dust, cliff and pollen, ship and statue, all pulled downward, all settled upon a silence more vast than any monument could withstand. One could almost call the seafloor a museum, but not of preservation, rather of accumulation. A place where entropy doesn't erase immediately, but where it piles endlessly, waiting to be compressed into deeper stories of stone. And yet, if all things fall eventually downward, if all cliffs collapse and rivers drain their mountains into silence, then what becomes of memory itself? Perhaps memory too is drawn downward, fragmentary, pressured, recomposed. Some parts vanish outright, others remain faintly fossilized in stone. Not personal memory, not detailed identity, but pattern, trace, signature. The ocean does not keep the whole, but it keeps just enough. Just as erosion, in carving away, defines shape as much as it dissolves it. Maybe to fall into abyss is not to be lost, but to be transformed into another kind of story. And so we return to the greater hum of gravity. This slow drawing down is not violence, and it is not mercy. It simply is. In this way, gravity shapes time itself. It ensures that nothing stands forever, that all things return to the deep, that memory itself is folded into stone and silence. And yet, if pressure and collapse sculpt the memory beneath oceans, what of the things left behind when oceans themselves retreat? What of the crystalline patterns of salt, those fragile but enduring residues of vanished seas, reminders that water once stood where now there is desert? Could salt itself be another diary entry, another archive of oceans drawn down beyond recall? If gravity's slow hand draws every mountain down into the abyss, grain by grain, then what of those times when oceans themselves drift away and leave their emptiness behind? Sometimes the sea retreats not only from coasts but from entire landscapes. And when water is gone, it leaves a strange, crystalline signature written in silence: salt. Fragile in the hand, ephemeral when dissolved, and yet in vast beds stretching hundreds of meters deep, salt becomes an archive as enduring as stone. Memory carved not in fossils, not in isotopes, not in dust, but in shimmering layers that tell us, an ocean once stood here. Salt is, at its core, the residue of absence. It is what remains when vast basins of water evaporate, when seas grow shallow and disappear, when heat and isolation conspire to leave behind their crystallized breath. The Mediterranean has done this before. Millions of years ago, seas once dried almost entirely, leaving deposits of salt kilometers thick beneath its modern waters. Later, when the Atlantic broke through again, the basin refilled, drowning that memory under new tides. But the crystals remained, silent testimony of an ocean erased and then reborn. To study them is to hold the memory of absence itself, transformed into permanence. Each salt bed is a calendar. Bands of white, pink, or translucent material mark cycles of flooding and drying, of returns and departures, of seas that advanced and receded like a breath over thousands of years. Embedded within them are minerals that reveal the chemistry of past atmospheres, hints of climates altered, worlds abandoned. Some salts carry microscopic fossils of halophilic organisms, Small lives adapted to thrive in extremity, adding their tiny voices to the crystalline page. To a geologist's eye, salt is not only a mineral but a memory. Each crystal a record of water that once covered, then retreated, then vanished. Could it be that salt is the most delicate memory the planet keeps? Fragile enough to dissolve with a touch, but also resilient enough to persist for hundreds of millions of years in underground vaults? Its duality mirrors memory itself. Fleeting and strong, dissolving easily yet impossible to erase completely. We can dissolve salt back to water, but not its meaning. To look upon a salt flat gleaming in the desert sun is to look upon what was once ocean, a surface of forgotten depth now flattened into a reflective silence. There is also a haunting intimacy in salt. It does not only live in deserts and ancient basins, but in us. Our blood is salted. Our tears are salted. The very fluids that flow through our veins are echoes of the seas that birthed us. We carry the ocean inside ourselves, crystallized into our chemistry. Could this be why salt feels so symbolically powerful in every culture? Why it becomes sacred, or preserving, or purifying? Not because it is rare, but because it feels like the Earth's most ancient residue, a taste carried from vanished oceans into every living body. And yet, what is most wondrous is that salt not only remembers what was, but hints at what will come. When geologists drill into buried salt beds, they unlock stories of tectonic change, of shifting climates, of oceans rising and falling with planetary rhythms. The position of a salt layer can tell us where continents once lay. The thickness of a bed can speak of climates that endured far different balances of heat and rain. Salt, in this way, is both memory and map, a crystalline recalling of the Earth's forgotten topographies. Some salt deposits lie hidden beneath mountains, carried upward when tectonics bent and folded the crust. A mountain can break open to reveal veins of salt, calling back to oceans that once pooled where deserts now stand. Other salts lie buried deep in subduction zones, destined to return eventually to magma, erasing their memory in fire. Even so, for the millions of years that they persist, they speak quietly of oceans long withdrawn. Is it possible, then, that salt is the Earth's most poetic kind of diary? Not written in detail, but in essence. Salt does not tell us the names of creatures, or the color of skies, or the songs that roamed through reefs. It tells us simply that water once lived here, that something as vast as an ocean could vanish, and that even in its absence, the planet remembers. It is as if the Earth itself whispers, "Nothing leaves entirely. Even absence leaves residue. This residue is stark. Walking across a salt flat is like walking across memory incarnate. The sky reflects upon its brilliance, doubling the heavens. The surface crunches faintly underfoot, crystalline, fragile, echoing with silence. And if you let your gaze stretch across the horizon, you feel the uncanny truth that beneath your feet once swam entire ecosystems. The bed you stand upon is not a desert at all, but a drowned silence made solid. Perhaps this is memory in its purest state. Not the preservation of detail, but the preservation of loss. And salt is more than passive witness. It shapes landscapes, too. Salt flows like slow ice beneath weight, forming domes and ridges, subtly sculpting overlying strata. Oil and gas reservoirs often curl against salt's boundaries, making it quietly essential for much of human history as well. In this way, salt not only remembers oceans, but participates in the story of civilizations themselves. Its memory becomes entangled with ours, invisible yet persistent, affecting where we settle, where we dig, where we extract. Still, the haunting beauty remains this. Every grain of salt is a reminder of water that once was, of oceans absent yet not absent entirely. In their crystals we see both what the Earth lost and how it carries that loss forward. Salt teaches us that forgetting is not erasure but transformation, that memory often lingers in residues so subtle we overlook them. And perhaps, standing beneath stars on a flat salted plain, we might feel this directly, that we, too, are residues of vanished times, our bodies crystallizations of forgotten epochs. But one cannot stop there, for salt invites the next wonder. If oceans withdraw and leave behind crystalline records, If salt preserves the memory of their retreat, then what of time itself? How is time remembered? Not in crystals, not in grains, but in flow itself. Could time resemble the ocean more than the clock, shifting, circling, erasing, and reforming? Perhaps memory itself is entangled with cycles of fluid, repetitions of becoming and dissolving, never linear, always wave-like. If salt is the residue left when oceans retreat, the crystalline testimony of what once was, then it invites a deeper, more unsettling thought, that perhaps memory itself is not linear, but cyclical, much like the seas themselves. Unlike us, who measure existence with ticking hands of a clock, moving forward from one moment into the next, the ocean remembers in loops. It does not record in tidy sequences, but in repetitions, overlappings, erasures, and recompositions. This diary is not a single line, but a tide advancing, withdrawing, returning again. Could it be, then, that time itself looks more like an ocean than a clock? When we think of time, we imagine it as straight, past behind us, present fleeting, future ahead. But the ocean teaches a different picture. Its currents cycle endlessly, circulating warmth and salt across millennia. Its tides rise and fall, repeating the same dance under gravity's pull. Its depths compress sediments into stone, only to raise them again as mountains that erode back into the sea. Nothing in the ocean moves only forward, it moves outward, downward, back again. It folds its memory into loops, patterns, echoes. What appeared lost once arises anew in another form, as if time itself were recirculated rather than spent. Scientists reading ocean archives find this cycle everywhere. Isotopes of oxygen swing back and forth between ice ages and warmth, recorded in shells as alternating rhythms, like the inhale and exhale of Earth's breath. Dust settled into cores reveals repeating intervals of expansion and collapse, each layer nearly mirroring one older still beneath it. Wave upon wave, pulse upon pulse. When charted, these patterns do not resemble a straight road. They resemble tides, spirals, oscillations. The planet's story is cyclical, recursive, more oceanic than linear. Philosophers have long asked whether time is arrow or circle. The ocean seems to whisper both. The cycles never return to precisely the same point. The tide may rise again, but it is not the exact tide as yesterday's. The current may loop, but the water within it is new. Just as waves crest and fall but never identically, time may spiral, circling familiar patterns while still carrying forward with subtle difference. To call it linear is too narrow, to call it circular too simple. The ocean's entangled time is something more mysterious, a weaving of recurrence and change, continuity laced with forgetting. Is it possible, then, that memory belongs more to the ocean's way than to our own? We long for sequence, for a straight story with beginning, middle, end. But the planet does not preserve in such clean divisions. It stores fragments in overlapping layers of silt, where younger and older stories blur together. Currents mix signatures of climates past with climates present. Subduction swallows eras whole into fire, returning them later as new stone. Even extinction, which seems like final silence, is followed by renewal, a pattern repeating in altered form. Perhaps the ocean's entangled time is more truthful than any human clock. It admits fragmentation, forgetting, recurrence, transformation. We too may sense this entanglement, even if unconsciously. Why else do moments feel at times familiar, as if time rippled back upon itself? Why else do we find echoes of ancient myths in modern stories, as if some cycles repeat across generations? Maybe memory follows tides, not straight paths. Maybe what feels like déjà vu is less an illusion and more an awareness of cyclical time beneath our linear narrations. Maybe our lives are waves repeating within larger currents, patterns beyond the span of a century, beyond the grasp of a single identity. The ocean shows us how strange entangled time can be. On its floor lie the shells of creatures extinct for hundreds of millions of years, pressed beside microplastics shed only decades ago. Layers mingle. What is ancient and what is new rest nearly side by side within reach of a drilling core. Time in sediment is not aligned sequentially. It is entangled, pressed together, strata of different ages bent, tilted, reordered. What appears side by side may in fact be separated by epochs. What appears far apart may have occurred in tandem. Memory here is scrambled, not lost but rearranged. Like the ocean itself, time is not neat. It is fluid, turbulent, overlapping. And if this is so for stone and chemistry, perhaps it is true also for consciousness. Could our own lives be caught in cycles far larger than we know, repeating their rhythms in ways we only sometimes perceive? Perhaps memory is not confined to the short path of one lifespan, but connected to planetary spirals, epochs that outlast the species that observe them. Is it possible that who we are is less important than the tides we are part of, that our identities are not single lines, but temporary expressions of rhythms much larger? Maybe we are remembered not individually but collectively, through the repetition of patterns across deep time. There is something oddly soothing in this thought. For if time is not arrow alone, then loss itself is not final, only part of a pattern. Oceans withdraw, but they return. Deserts expand, but seeds endure. Species vanish, but evolution rises again. Even silence is not absolute, but part of a longer loop pulsing toward renewal. Perhaps memory's power is not in preserving everything intact, but in ensuring that certain rhythms repeat. Not because they are remembered in detail, but because they are remembered in form. And yet, in this entanglement, there is also humility. For just as currents overlap, so do erasures. Old oceans consumed by subduction are irretrievable. Whole ages are reconfigured into molten stone, rewritten beyond recognition. Entangled time preserves, but it also erases, often at once. Perhaps this is what gives the ocean its profound mystery, that memory and forgetting are not opposites here, but twins. The ocean moves in cycles not to remember perfectly, but to ensure that something remains, even if it is transformed. What does this tell us about time itself? Maybe that history is less like a road, and more like the ocean's surface. Waves cresting and dispersing, patterns forming and dissolving, never repeating perfectly, never completely vanishing. Time could be cyclical the way a tide is, without beginning or end, only continued rhythm. And if the ocean remembers in rhythm, then perhaps we too are remembered not as selves, but as pulses within the greater tide. The measure of us may not be sequence, but recurrence. Not permanence, but echo. And so we drift inside this thought, carried by the ocean's entangled time. For if time truly flows like this, then what of the echoes left beyond human voices? What of the sounds that slip into silence, yet linger faintly beneath the waters, carrying forward longer than any song? Could even echoes themselves be part of the ocean's strange, cyclical way of remembering? If time itself flows like the ocean, looping, repeating, never straight, then perhaps its echoes do too. Not all memory lies in stone or salt, not all in isotopes or dust. Some memories drift as sound, rippling briefly through water, fading, but not always vanishing entirely. Beneath the hush of the ocean, there lingers a library not of fossils but of echoes. Sounds carried vast distances, perhaps still faintly resonating, perhaps folded quietly into silence but never erased completely. These are the echoes beneath silence. Once, whales filled the oceans with their songs. Blue whales, the largest animals the Earth has ever known, sent low vibrations that traveled across hemispheres, pulses slow and almost planetary in scale. Humpbacks wove elaborate sequences, phrases repeated and revised like evolving compositions of an entire species. To drift within those oceans was to swim inside an endless chorus, voices overlapping, answering, resonating. The seas were once alive not only with motion but with sound. A cathedral of water-domed hymns recited again and again. Sound travels differently in water than in air. In the ocean's depths, low frequencies bend gently and can drift across thousands of kilometers, moving within thermal layers that guide their path like invisible highways. A single whale's call could ripple across entire basins, reaching ears unimaginably far. Imagine for a moment an Antarctic whale singing to a listener in equatorial seas, their connection woven entirely by sound. This was an ocean of voices, Memory made not of shells or isotopes but song. And here is the haunting question. Do those songs truly vanish? Or do some fragments remain, faint, subtle, embedded like whispers within the ocean's great acoustics? Sound dissolves gradually, absorbed, scattered, but perhaps not all completely. Some vibrations may linger longer than we realize, reverberating faintly within layers of thermocline, bent and refracted again and again. Could the ocean still hold ghostly traces of voices long hushed, faint echoes without origin, choruses still crossing basins though their singers are gone? Maybe, maybe not. But the idea itself makes the silence hum with weight. Into this silence we have added our own sounds. Our engines, our propellers, our sonar. Submarines pulse the depths with clicks that carry for miles. Shipping vessels produce a ceaseless drone. Seismic surveys hammer the sea floor. Our echoes now mingle with those of whales, with those of earthquakes, with those of storms collapsing waves into the deep. Together, they compose a new layer of sound scribbled upon the ancient one, scar and chorus intertwined. Is it possible that the ocean has become an archive of overlapping echoes, natural and human both, each written briefly into its memory of waves? Scientists sometimes speak of soundscapes, acoustic pictures of ecosystems, made not with images but with vibrations layered together. Whales, fish choruses, snapping shrimp crackling in symphony. Add to this the vibrations of storms, the distant tremors of tectonic shifts, the passing wash of human engines. Together they form a portrait of time living itself out in sound. To record a soundscape is to take a core sample like sediments but in frequencies instead of stone. Could this be the most fleeting yet most alive form of planetary memory? Vibrations that exist only in passing, yet move across worlds and linger faintly afterward, entangled in silence? And here comes the deeper thought. Perhaps the ocean itself is less silent than we imagine. To us, descending in submarines with our machines switched off, it feels quiet, endless hush. But in truth, even today, the sea is filled with faint voices. Whales still sing, though fewer. Fish still chorus in shallows, their collective grunts and croaks weaving together like hidden choirs. Icebergs crack and sigh as they fracture. Volcanoes bubble and mutter far beneath. Silence in the ocean may not be absence at all. It may be layered memory, some sounds so current, others merely lingering echoes that never fully left. What if silence itself is an illusion then? What if what we call silence is only the gathering of sounds too stretched, too ancient, too faint for us to hear? Could the quiet we sense be filled still with the hum of extinct creatures, their calls refracted endlessly until reduced to undertones in the planet's deeper frequencies? If ocean time is entangled, why not ocean sound? Perhaps some vibrations loop back on themselves, repeating as faint ghosts across centuries, overlapping past with present. There is something profoundly humbling in this thought. For in the stillness we believe empty, there may still be songs from before our kind ever walked the earth. When trilobites scuttled, when great reptiles swam, when ecosystems thrived and collapsed, the sounds of their worlds passed briefly through water too. Though their bodies fossilized, their songs are gone? Or are they? Maybe the pressure and weight of time erased them utterly. Or maybe faint traces dissolved into silence itself. Maybe not remembered as melodies, but present as resonance, as permanent hum. And so, standing upon a shore, listening to a sea that seems quiet but endlessly vast, we might sense more than waves. We might sense layers of sound so deep they blend to stillness. Echoes upon echoes, whales upon waves, storms upon silence, sonar upon silence again. Memory in this medium is not seen, not touched, but heard, or perhaps not heard, only imagined. Still, the imagination itself feels true, feels sufficient. The ocean invites us to wonder not only what we can prove, but what we can feel in its hush. And yet, if echoes alone can persist beneath silence, if sound itself can blur with time until it becomes indistinguishable from stillness, then perhaps death in the ocean holds no ending either. Perhaps even decay releases its sounds. Bones cracking, sediments shifting, bodies falling into the seafloor. Each sound a final memory to be carried downward into the abyss. And if the ocean already fills itself with echoes of life and death alike, then what of the greatest echo of all? The echo made not by sound, but by collapse itself, where life feeds on its own ending. If echoes can linger beneath silence, faint traces folding into stillness, then perhaps death itself carries its own resonance in the ocean. For unlike the sunlit world where life thrives on light, in the deeper waters life survives on endings. At the abyssal plain, at hadal depths, there is no sunlight to kindle ecosystems. There is no energy falling freely from above except in one form: decay. Here, existence is threaded from funerals. The ocean, in its deepest layers, becomes a mirror of death, sustaining its unseen worlds not by beginnings, but by countless endings. Every day, a quiet rain falls through the water column. Marine snow, it is called, endless flurries of dust composed of bodies fragmented and dissolved. Zooplankton that died near the surface, algae collapsing into detritus, tiny skeletons drifting downward in translucent white. Each fleck is a gravestone, and yet also an offering, dropped into the blackness where other creatures wait. For in the abyss, nothing grows from sunlight. Everything grows from what dies above. Without decay, there would be no life beyond the reach of the sun. Larger funerals come as well. A single whale fall, the immense body of a leviathan collapsing into darkness, can sustain an entire ecosystem for decades. First, scavengers descend, sharks tear, fish swarm. Then come mussels and worms, feasting on softening tissues. Later, only bones remain, yet these too give rise to communities of bacteria and strange organisms that feed on sulfides released as fat-rich marrow dissolves. A whale's body becomes cathedral and village, birth and sustenance, death transfigured into life across decades. To the abyss, the fall of such titans is rare, but it is also salvation. Could it be, then, that the abyss remembers life most faithfully through death? Its archives are built from what falls. Its ecology exists by turning absence into nourishment. In a sense, the ocean's deepest layers reflect memory stripped of sentiment. Memory as process, memory as transformation. Life depends not on preserving the living, but on consuming their passing. The deep sea teaches us that death is never an end alone, but an inheritance endlessly redistributed. And here lies the paradox. A world thriving on death is also a world of continuity. The reign of plankton, near invisible, never truly stops. It is steady, like breathing, sustaining those who wait below. Though each particle is tiny, over centuries the sum is immense. Sediments built from countless generations dissolving into one another, blurring into the floor of the abyss. Death here is not singular, not catastrophic. It is constant, patient, cumulative. Not destruction, but foundation. Is it possible that in this way the abyss mirrors us? For we, too, are sustained by what came before, by the silenced ecologies that became soil, by the endless cycle of lives dissolving into nutrients. The food we eat, the ground we stand upon, the air we breathe, all exist because of death that folded into continuity. We imagine decay as absence, but perhaps the ocean suggests another meaning. That decay is the pulse of persistence, that loss is always and everywhere transfigured. When oceanographers lower their instruments into black depths, they measure faint fluxes of carbon and nitrogen, signs of this material cascade. Each data point is a tally of death, but also a tally of survival, a measure of how much the world above has given to the world below. It is strangely moving to think that records of planetary change, the distribution of organisms, the balance of climates, are traceable not only in living forms but in what has died and descended. The deepest ocean is both grave and witness, cemetery and sanctuary. And yet, not everything is equal in this descent. Some creatures dissolve before reaching far below, their fragile bodies reduced to atomic traces kilometers above the abyssal plain. Others sink intact, carrying their shapes with them all the way to the seafloor, resting as fossils for millions of years before pressure transforms them into stone. In this way, the ocean reminds us again that memory is partial. Some deaths write themselves clearly into the planet's archive. Others vanish before record. Maybe, in the end, forgetting is also part of sustenance. The abyss holds what it can. The rest is given back to circulation. There is a quiet echo of entropy here. For though life transforms death into energy, though decay breathes new forms into being, in time even those new forms return to decay again. All strands tie back into the abyss eventually, until even stone itself is carried downward into subduction. The deep ocean does not resist entropy, performs it beautifully with patience. This may be why the abyss feels timeless. We are looking at entropy not as destruction but as transformation. Memory here is built on erasure. Life is built on death. And so the abyss is not empty, though we think of it so. It is not silent, though sound falls faintly. It is not lifeless, though no sun shines. It is full, rich, sustained entirely by endings. In this way, the ocean below illuminates the ocean above, showing us what we too must face. That death is not a boundary alone, but a mirror that turns lives into continuation. If the abyss teaches us one truth clearly, it is that silence feeds echoes, that loss feeds pattern, that endings sustain beginnings hidden beyond our view. Perhaps this is why contemplation of the ocean often returns us to contemplation of ourselves. For if its lowest depths are cathedrals of death turned into renewal, then so too might our own lives be. Maybe our dissolutions, slow or sudden, are simply the release of what was briefly gathered in us back into a longer continuity. Maybe individuality itself is only a temporary arrangement of patterns, destined to scatter but not to vanish entirely. Death is not nothing, it is transformation. The abyss whispers that endlessly. And yet, if the abyss itself is a mirror of death's persistence, one question lingers quietly. Beyond its darkness, beyond these funereal ecologies, are there places where even death finds no sustenance? Where decay collapses into absolute silence? Where life cannot persist at all, and the deep plain itself becomes like a desert? If so, then what does the ocean do with such forgotten, barren places? Its empty floors where even memory cannot feed? If the abyss is a mirror of death, turning endings into sustenance, then there are also places where even death does not linger long enough to be consumed. Places where the slow rain of decay falls thin, where bodies dissolve before reaching the bottom, and where silence thickens into something heavier than memory. These are the forgotten deserts beneath the sea, plains so vast and barren that they stretch further than any desert on land. No dunes here, no winds, only endless flatness, swept blank by time. At first thought, the ocean floor should be alive with remnants, with shells and bones, fossils and echoes of abundance above. But many expanses are nearly empty. The abyssal plains, deep stretches thousands of meters below sunlight, receive almost nothing from above. The marine snow that nurtures other depths thins as it falls, most of it consumed before it reaches so far. What remains is sparse, flakes of organic dust too meager to nourish demand. Within these plains, life is scarce, scattered across kilometers. What you find are not reefs or forests but bones of fish bleached pale, half buried in silt, the silent outline of a structure slowly dissolving into absence. It is haunting, this emptiness, because it reveals something rare, a place where even death seems unable to persist as memory. Without sustenance, scavengers cannot thrive. Without scavengers, decay is swift. What is left behind is not rebirth, but silence. It is like walking a desert on land, where sand stretches out, featureless and endless. But here it is darker, heavier, more final. For land deserts are dry, but beneath the sea these deserts are drowned, bereft not from lack of water, but from lack of life itself. Could it be that these blank plains are the ocean's forgotten pages, where no story is written because time itself flows too thin? Unlike cliffs of fossils, unlike reefs of abundance, here there is no record but the erosion of absence. Cores drilled into these plains sometimes yield only monotony, fine mud, unchanging, featureless across millions of years. Entire epochs slip by leaving no signature but silence. This is the planet's invisible forgetting, its erasure written not by catastrophe but by lack. Memory survives through abundance and collapse, but in these places, there was neither. Only stillness. There is a strange patience here, an endurance of nothingness. Perhaps these plains show us that the world does not always need to record, that forgetting is just as essential to time's balance as remembering. To hold silence for millions of years is also to carry memory, but in another form, memory not of what was, but of what never was. Could this be just as important as the moments of abundance? Could emptiness too be the earth's way of remembering the space between songs? And yet, even in deserts, life persists. Scattered across these plains are tiny creatures, single worms, brittle stars, ghostly fish. They live sparsely, like lanterns in an endless night, each one surviving on what little falls from above. Their lives stretch long, slow, calibrated to scarcity. Some deep-sea fish spend decades waiting between substantial meals. Some bacteria thrive on the merest traces of chemical residue in the mud. Though the plain looks vacant, it is not vacant entirely. Even emptiness brings forth adaptation, a patience sculpted by eternity. What dreams dissolve in these forgotten plains? Perhaps all dreams, folded away into silence before they were ever written. The bones that lie here dissolve so gently they leave almost nothing behind. No fossil, no pattern, no shard of shape. Extinction is not always thunderous. Sometimes it is invisibility, loss so complete we do not even know what was lost. How many species lived briefly here, then ended with not even ash or isotope to whisper their presence? We will never know. These deserts carry secret extinctions, entire disappearances hidden not in tombs but in the blankness of nothing surviving. Maybe this is what unsettles us most about them, that they remind us of our own impermanence not through drama, but through quiet obliteration. Most of us imagine departure as marked, remembered, fossilized like the ammonite in stone. But for many lives, departure is more like these plains, swift, untraceable, forgotten. The ocean deserts remind us we do not all become echoes. Some things vanish utterly without residue, and that, too, is part of the ocean's patience. Still, one must ask, is absence ever complete? Even if no fossils linger, isotopes still shift in sediments. Even if no bodies persist, dust remains. Minerals trace atmospheres within the mud. Perhaps the memory here is not in life directly, but in chemistry. Not in bone, but in ratios. In this subtle way, even forgotten plains whisper something. Not loudly, not visibly, but humbly. There is no such thing as pure absence. Something always remains, even if it is only the silence itself. And so, we see these drowned deserts not only as places without abundance, but as part of the planet's long pulse. They are intervals of rest, the resting beats between extinction and bloom, the blank measures that allow patterns to form again. Perhaps forgetting in this way is not loss but rhythm. The plains beneath the sea remind us that memory and silence together create balance, that the story of Earth is written equally in what thrives and in what leaves no trace at all. And yet, if some places contain only absence, if deserts can stretch not only across sands but beneath seas, then what of the hidden fires beneath those silences? What of the vents that break through darkness and emptiness, revealing not absence but eruption? Life born not from light or from death, but from heat hidden in stone. If deserts beneath the sea reveal silence dressed as absence, then the mystery only deepens when silence is broken, not by sound, not by motion, but by fire. For even in the deepest plains, where life seems thin and patience rules all, there are places where the ocean floor is startled awake by volcanic breath. Hydrothermal vents, chimneys of smoke and heat rising from cracks in the crust, remind us that beneath even the quietest waters, fire persists. And in those fires, impossible worlds exist. To see a hydrothermal vent is to watch contradiction made visible. Water in these places is not the expected cold of the abyss, close to freezing. It is boiling, acidic, black with dissolved metals, plumes reaching upward like smoke columns into endless dark. Around them, whole ecosystems form, feeding not on sunlight but on chemistry, on hydrogen sulfide, iron, methane. Tube worms rise in pale towers. Crabs, shrimp, and strange fish gather in the heat. Bacteria bloom in the plumes themselves, feeding directly on minerals. These are alien ecologies, flourishing not in spite of the absence of light, but entirely without need for it. Could it be that here, in these fiery oases, the memory of Earth's own beginnings is preserved? Many scientists believe life may have started at vents much like these, billions of years ago, when the young ocean was collapsing with storms of chemical change. Their energy flowing from Earth's molten heart met water above, creating gradients, reactions, and the first brief sparks of metabolism. If so, then hydrothermal vents are more than curiosities. They are echoes of origin, laboratories still ongoing, where Earth rehearses the act of creation again and again, hiding small experiments in memory-making far below our sight. And yet, their memory is different from fossils, from isotopes, from salt. These are not passive archives. Hydrothermal vents are active, erupting, dissolving, collapsing. Their chimneys rise from minerals precipitated in superheated water, growing like fragile spires, only to crumble within decades. They do not last. And yet, their impermanence is constant. Fresh vents appear. New ecosystems bloom. Old ones are buried in the dark. Their memory does not lie in endurance but in recurrence. They remind us that not all memory is kept by holding. Some is kept by repeating. The smoke they breathe holds signatures of the deep earth itself. Isotopes of metals, ratios carried from mantle rocks, drifting upward in black water. To study them is to read chemistry unaltered by the surface, raw signals of tectonic memory older than continents. Each vent is not only a habitat, but a diary of the fire below. They tell us where plates stretch and crack, where subduction melts and releases, where water meets stone in restless negotiation. The vents are phrases in the conversation between ocean and earth, whispered in minerals rising unseen. And still, there is something otherworldly here. The forms of life clinging to these vents do not resemble the familiar green of plants or the familiar hunger of animals. They derive their energy entirely from chemistry, from molecules dissolving in heat. In their alienness, they remind us of possibilities beyond what we expect, suggesting that life may not be singular to Earth. If it can arise where there is no light, no air, no sky, if it can arise from fire and mineral alone, then perhaps it can arise beneath the ice of Europa, beneath the crust of Enceladus, within any place where rock meets hidden water. Could Earth's fiery vents be rehearsals not only of its own origin, but hints of other worlds remembering themselves? It is uncanny to imagine that beneath our quiet oceans lie testaments not to permanence, but to resilience. That in places we once thought barren, eruptions of life follow eruptions of fire. That memory is not always written in stone, but in cycles of eruption and collapse, creation and erasure. Perhaps the vents are not inconsistent but instructive. Perhaps they teach us that even where endings are constant, beginnings are inevitable. But vents are not isolated. Their plumes drift, carrying metals and chemicals outward into the wider ocean. Even in their impermanence, they leave residues, signals scattered into abyssal mud, faint chemical markers woven into sediments. Memory again appears in chemistry, in isotopes, in traces too subtle for the eye, enduring longer than the vents themselves. Could this be the ocean's way, transforming even eruption into quiet testimony, folding the loudness of fire into the silence of mud? And if life began here, as many believe, then death too must return here in echo. The chemistry that sustains vents is also chemistry of decay, life breaking matter down as it feeds. These black smokers are both womb and grave, birthplaces of metabolism, and furnaces into which remains dissolve. In them, life and death are not opposites but continuations, mirrors of entropy's work across scale. Perhaps to call them alien is misleading. Perhaps they are simply the most honest forms of Earth's memory, raw, energetic, unsteady, and endless. Hydrothermal fields stretch across mid-ocean ridges, thousands of kilometers long, a network of fiery lungs beneath the world. Their exhalations rise unseen, yet they are among the most constant processes on Earth. Day after day, decade after decade, they vent, they collapse, they grow again. To visit one is to feel the pull of deep time compressed into motion. They do not fossilize their story, they live it again and again. And in this way, They invite us to see memory differently, not as archive but as rhythm. Fossils speak of death, isotopes of cycles, salt of retreat. But vents speak of fire returning, life beginning anew. The balance of memory requires both, the still pages written in sediment, and the living rituals repeated in heat. Maybe memory, in its truest form, is both what lingers and what repeats. Both silence pressed in stone and fire reborn in water. And yet, even as vents blaze with resilience, another question emerges softly. If the ocean can hold such fiery oases, if it conceals reminders that life always rises from endings, then what of the things humanity itself has left to drift downward? What of our own fragments, our own debris, descending now toward the seafloor? Could they too find themselves mingled in sediments among fossils and fire alike? Our own accidental memory pressed into the same silence as trilobites and ammonites? If hydrothermal vents remind us that fire persists beneath silence, repeating its ancient experiments in creation, then the currents of the ocean also remind us that silence receives what we release. Not only the remains of forests or the shells of vanished species, but the fragments of ourselves. For threaded throughout the deep are not only geological memories, but cultural ones. Lost ships, drowned statues, forgotten harbors, artifacts of human striving carried down into the same abyss. These are the driftwood of civilizations, resting at the bottom of seas we will never fully see, becoming archives we never meant to write. The ocean, indifferent and patient, has become our unintended librarian. Wooden caravels built centuries ago lie scattered in sand, their masts broken but their hulls preserved in low oxygen. Ships of steel and iron, rusting slowly, now haunt the seabed as artificial reefs. Within their shadows, corals grow, fish swarm. Life transforms these drowned vessels from story into ecosystem, from technology into reef stone of the future. In their shifting lives, they remind us that memory is never final. It always changes meaning once the ocean takes it. Not only vessels, but statues too rest upon the seabed. Storms and quakes sink harbors. Wars and rituals cast stone effigies into water. Human likeness dissolves under lichen and coral until we can no longer discern art from geology. The sea does not preserve intention, only form, and sometimes not even that. Salt corrodes, time collapses detail, until what remains is only fragment, shard, unmoored from context. Yet even so, the presence persists, carried forward less as story and more as sediment. Perhaps our civilizations, too, are destined to be known not by what they built, but by what drifted down. In some places, entire harbors have been swallowed. Earthquakes at Thera, floods in Alexandria, shores collapsed into sea. What once bustled with life, with trade and language, now lies obscured beneath sediments, waiting in silence. Archaeologists uncover streets paved in stone beneath waves, doorframes resting where fish now gather. These drowned cities remind us, our permanence is ocean's whim. What we imagine eternal may slip away in a day's flood, a century's rise, a tectonic sigh. The sea gathers what land forgets. Could it be that our true memory is not in monuments above ground, but in artifacts surrendered to ocean depth? For on land, erosion is quicker, winds and rains dismantle, deserts erase, hands repurpose. But in darkness, in silence, the seabed can hold for millennia. Bronzes slumber intact on shipwreck floors, amphorae scatter like constellations across sand, their arrangements unchanged except by currents. Entire canoes of Ice Age peoples, now long forgotten, may still rest in cold depths unvisited. The ocean writes memory by conserving accident. What slips, what sinks, what drowns, it gathers all. And yet, the ocean has no desire for curation. Memory here is chaotic, scattered. A toy from one century mingles with a warship from another. A modern container of plastic lies beside ancient pottery long buried and reborn. Cargo, relic, refuse, all blend into one stratum, pressed together by the patience of the abyss. Civilizations may fight to distinguish artifact from waste, but the ocean does not. To it, all is residue, all is clay for future stone. Could it be that millions of years from now, our wreckage too will become technofossil seams, bands of alloy and polymer carved into cliffs? Perhaps the driftwood of civilization is not isolated, but the beginning of humanity's geologic chapter. There is a strange humility in realizing that what endures is seldom what we wanted. We pour effort into architecture, language, knowledge, yet the record time will keep maybe coins flung into rivers, anchors abandoned, statues drowned mid-transport. Memory is not chosen, it gathers where the ocean decides. What dreams dissolve in this uncurated archive? Perhaps most of them. And yet, in time, fragments become stories again. Archaeologists' piece lives from shards, histories from amphorae brittle with salt. Humanity rediscovers its own traces not because it preserved them intentionally, but because the abyss was patient enough to hold them. Sometimes we find these fragments, and in doing so, wonder at ourselves. A bronze bell rung centuries ago, lifted intact. A ship lost with whispered myth, revealed almost untouched. Each recovery reminds us that memory may sleep, not vanish. The ocean may not erase us as completely as we fear. Perhaps a future species or we ourselves, after collapse and rebirth, will rediscover such fragments again. Like fossils, they will tell not the full story, but enough to spark imagination, enough to whisper they were here. There is also unease, for not all the driftwood the ocean gathers is relic. Much of it is waste. Thousands of containers lost at sea, plastics adrift, ghost nets winding across the deep. Future sediments will preserve these too. Our age will not only be remembered by shipwrecks and statues, but by polymers and alloys absent from natural epochs. Perhaps the most enduring driftwood of our civilization will not be art, but trash. That possibility hums like an uncomfortable truth, that the ocean does not judge what it gathers. It will cradle amphora and plastic alike in the same patience. Maybe this is where humility must meet acceptance. Forgotten harbors and drowned ships remind us that memory slips from our control. We may write, but what is read is chosen by time. The seabed does not file our intentions neatly. It merely accepts what falls, layering fragments into its silence. And yet, that silence is perhaps the most faithful narrator of all. Not because it tells the story we wish, but because it tells the one we left behind. And so, the driftwood of civilizations becomes less about preservation and more about perspective. It shows us that memory is messy, scattered, accidental, and yet it endures. Our artifacts, our vessels, our ruins, all are mingling now with ammonites and trilobites, with vents and volcanic minerals, with the isotopes of extinction layers. In deep time, there will be no distinction. Civilization is already absorbed into planetary memory. And yet, if even our fragments sleep within abyssal patience, pressed eventually into stone, then we must ask, what happens to the oceans themselves when their time ends? When currents cease, when tectonics draws seas downward, when whole waters slip into trenches never to rise. If civilizations can drown, can entire oceans drown too? If the seabed quietly preserves the driftwood of civilizations, then what of the oceans themselves that cradle those fragments? We think of seas as eternal, as if water were an infinite presence against the land. But just as rivers dry, just as mountains collapse grain by grain into silt, the oceans too are only temporary. Their scales of time are vast, but not infinite. The great cycles of tectonics ensure that oceans are born, altered, and erased. They vanish into trenches, consumed back into fiery crust, folded into the same silence as mountains long gone. Each sea we know is living on borrowed time. To trace this thought is to widen our gaze beyond the tides and waves we know, beyond the maps we hold in our minds. The Atlantic itself, so vast that it feels like permanence, is actually a young sea born when Pangaea split apart some 180 million years ago. Before it lay other oceans, older strangers with forgotten names. The Tethys Ocean swirled where now the Mediterranean is. The Panthalassic surrounded Pangaea, encircling nearly all. And even earlier, other oceans opened and shut, their waters consumed by the conveyor belts of plate tectonics. There have been oceans we cannot imagine, their surfaces reflecting suns long vanished, their lives now erased except in memory folded into stone. This is the quiet truth the planet carries, that oceans are as mortal as the creatures within them. Where seafloor spreads, new water basins open. Where trenches sink, old basins close. Over tens of millions of years, an ocean can widen into immensity, then collapse into a crack, its waters drawn downward into mantle fire. Subduction is both burial and transformation. Sediments carried downward are melted, pressed, remade, eventually returned as volcanic islands, as lava, as ash. Oceans end, but their memory becomes the very rock of Earth itself. Could it be that every ocean lives twice? Once in its waters, moving through currents and storms, and again in its stones, pressed into mountains twisted upward from seafloor strata? Consider the Himalayas. Beneath their snow lies not only rock, but the compressed memory of the Tethys Ocean. Within those peaks are fossils of ammonites that once swam at sea level, now stranded in thin air. The silence of oceans becomes the silence of summits. The oceans collapse, its subduction into crust, transforms it into ranges from which new rivers fall and new sediments flow. This recirculation is memory turned inside out. Entropy suggests endings, but endings, here, become beginnings folded in stone. No drop survives unchanged, and yet no ocean is fully erased. The very crust beneath us whispers of seas long swallowed. Salt flats mark ancient retreats. Fossilized reefs crown mountains. Limestone cliffs record life once suspended in waves. Every sea eventually collapses into fire, yet each leaves residuum, a trace, a page in Earth's diary too heavy to erase. And what future collapses wait? Already, geologists foresee the Atlantic's end. Slowly, Africa drifts northward toward Europe. If the movement continues, the Mediterranean will close, compressing until mountains rise in its place. In another cycle, a new continent will form, seas replaced by summits yet unborn. The Pacific too is narrowing, drawn down into its trenches, shrinking inch by inch. Perhaps in hundreds of millions of years, it will vanish entirely, its waters pulled into mantle, its memory pressed into volcanic arcs across continents. Every sea we love, every map we know, falls within these vast tectonic rhythms. Fleeting, temporary, destined to vanish, to be rewritten in forms we cannot yet see. There is humility here, for we often imagine oceans as timeless witnesses, archives that will outlast us. But in truth, even they must leave. Not quickly, not within the span of our brief civilizations, but inevitably. No basin survives forever. Perhaps memory itself on a planetary scale is less about endurance of details than endurance of transformation. Oceans dying, yet becoming something new, seas dissolving only to rise again in altered forms, oceans preserved not in their surfaces, but in their afterlives as stone, as range, as silt reborn in rivers. What, then, does this tell us about memory itself? That to collapse is not always to vanish. That disappearance of form does not erase essence. That seas swallowed into the earth live on differently. Perhaps our own lives may echo the pattern. Our identities collapse into silence, but remnants remain woven into cycles beyond our sight. Memory is not the endurance of image, but the endurance of transformation. The ocean models this for us endlessly, patient, unhurried, grander than we can fully accept. And yet, there is a haunting question left in the silence of these cycles. If oceans collapse, if they vanish entirely into stone, what becomes of the last one? When plate tectonics no longer open new basins, when heat of mantle cools too far to drive spreading ridges, is it possible that no new ocean will emerge? That the last waters will sink into trenches unreplaced, earth left barren, its seas evaporated or subducted fully? Perhaps so, but such an end lies billions of years ahead, beyond our species, beyond our world. Still, the thought lingers. If oceans themselves dissolve into absence, then memory of them must survive only in stone. Ocean becomes mountain, liquid becomes fossil, time folds in silence. In this way, the ocean's collapse is not tragedy but continuity. Each dying sea gives rise to something else. Mountain, desert, salt flat, river valley. And each cycle writes memory not in the ocean's present, but in its remnants. Could it be that oceans, in their very dissolution, are memory keepers greater than in their existence? For while alive, they flow and change too rapidly to preserve themselves. It is only in their collapse that permanence arrives, only in their death that their stories inscribe themselves into Earth's body. And so we are left with the quiet realization that memory always costs form. To be remembered, one must dissolve. To be preserved, one must collapse into something else. Oceans whisper this truth through their geologic legacy, reminding us that impermanence does not mean oblivion. It means transformation etched deeply into the planet's heart. And yet, if oceans can collapse entirely, dissolving into trenches and fire, then one final, unsettling thought rises. If seas themselves vanish, leaving only fossils, salts, and mountains behind, then what of time itself? Will time too collapse, folding its loops inward, its echoes silenced? Or does time, like the tides, always prepare one last ripple? A final wave moving outward, carrying with it the faint memory of all that has ever been. If oceans themselves are destined to collapse into stone, then we are left with one final, haunting thought. What happens when even time itself seems to collapse? Entropy speaks quietly, but with certainty. Currents will thin, tides will wane. Energy, once moving ceaselessly between sun and water, fire and atmosphere, will one day even out, stretched flat across silence. The ocean will cease to breathe, not in violence, but in stillness. And when it does, what becomes of memory? Will it last as a frozen archive, pressed into permanence? Or will it dissolve into nothingness, erased without even an echo? To slow our minds into this horizon is to feel the rhythm of entropy itself. For everywhere we look, energy flows from difference to sameness. Warm currents spread their heat until waters equalize. Mountains crumble down until plains expand. Even stars, those ancient furnaces, burn down into dim lumps of cinder. Nothing resists entropy forever. Not life, not oceans, not even time as we understand it. If all cycles end, then perhaps the planet's great library too. Its isotopes, its fossils, its currents, its forests drowned and seas reborn, will be folded back into stillness. The ocean's memory is a delicate balance between preservation and forgetting. But what if, at the very end, both balancing poles vanish, leaving only silence? No winds stirring waves, no tides breathing out the pull of the moon, no rivers carrying sediment into depth, no subduction dragging oceans into fire. Just water, flat and unmoving, surface smoothed into eternity. Such an ocean could not sustain life. It would be archive without reader, library without witness. Memory would remain not because it is used, but because there would be nowhere left for it to go. Could this be the last state of time, not erasure but frozen preservation, too still to evolve? Scientists and philosophers alike wonder if entropy's horizon is one of heat or of ice. The heat death of the universe. Energy spread so wide and even that nothing can spark movement again. Oceans, in this state, would not boil but flatten, motionless, waiting. In such stillness, memories of isotopes and fossils and drowned civilizations might still be there, locked within minerals, resting for eternity. Or perhaps even these would degrade, structures of molecules slipping into undifferentiated randomness, until no archive remains. Silence not as patient keeper, but as absence absolute. And yet, maybe memory would not vanish so easily. Because memory is not only archive, not only the imprints in stone or salt, but also pattern. And patterns, even when cycles slow, may linger faintly. Currents flatten, yes, but the marks they have left on cliffs, on sediments, on chemistry persist. Entropy may silence motion, but not erase its history. Is it possible that the last wave of time is not a collapse into forgetfulness, but a settling into permanence, memory ceasing to rewrite itself, choosing instead to finally rest? Imagine, then, the last wave rising. A tide so faint it crests not in minutes or hours, but in millions of years, thinning slowly until it vanishes into a flat horizon. Perhaps it carries with it every echo, the last whisper of whale song folded into water, the last plume of vent smoke dissolving into dark, the last grain of dust falling into seabed. Everything pooled together, layered into a single silence. Time itself not gone, but completed, like a story ending in a whisper too soft to hear. But could there even be such a last wave? Or are we, in our language, too accustomed to endings, where the universe prefers recurrence? Perhaps cycles are never truly final. Perhaps oceans collapse, yes, but new waters rise. Perhaps time itself is less of an arrow and more of an endless sea. Waves folding into each other, repeating their crests in forms we cannot trace. Entropy predicts stillness, but maybe stillness is only apparent surface mask over deeper cycles beyond our scales. Could time itself have abysses we cannot perceive? And so, we arrive at an unsettling paradox. The last wave of time may not be absence. It may be transformation, cycles so slowed they appear still to us, but which, on another plane, continue without our witness. The distinction between memory and forgetting collapses too. Silence swallows song, yet fragments endure. Identity dissolves into salt, yet the chemistry persists. Oceans vanish into stone, yet fossils recall them. Perhaps entropy is not forgetfulness. Perhaps it is memory's final form, uncycling, unmoving, unchanging. There is something oddly tender in this possibility, that all things, even if silenced, become gathered, not erased, not lost, but stilled. In stillness, all stories press upon each other like sediments. No voice louder than another, no pattern overtaking the rest. Perfect equality, which to us feels like oblivion, but to the planet may feel like completion. In this sense, the last wave of time is not despair. It is rest, a final settling of echoes into one undisturbed silence. Yet some part of us resists. We want waves to continue. We want memory to flow. We want oceans to rise and fall, not to still. And perhaps that longing is what keeps us awake, what makes us human, what ties us to time. We do not live long enough to see oceans collapse. We will not remain long enough to feel entropy's horizon. But in imagination we reach for it anyway, asking, will memory survive at the end? Will it shape stone forever? Will it dissolve into dust invisible? Will there even be a witness to say it mattered at all? Maybe, maybe not. All that is certain is the quiet truth entropy leaves us. Motion fades, currents thin, cycles slow, oceans cease. Yet what lingers is beyond our knowing. Whether frozen archive or dissolved nothingness, whether eternal echo or final erasure, we cannot say. What we can feel, though, is that the ocean has already rehearsed such endings many times before. For each of its collapses has looked like loss, but has become transformation. Each silence appeared as erasure, but became continuity. Perhaps the last wave of time will be no different. Perhaps even stillness can be memory. And yet, if entropy itself fades us into silence, if oceans flatten forever, then maybe the final question is not what remains of the ocean, but what remains of us within it. When seas dissolve, when memory freezes, when identity merges into tides beyond recognition, will we still be whispering somewhere in that silence? Or will we, too, have become only part of the ocean's last echo? If the last wave of time drifts into silence, carrying all motions into stillness, then perhaps what remains is not erasure, but transformation. Perhaps we, too, are meant to become part of the ocean's echo, not as individuals clinging to permanence, not as civilizations building monuments against entropy, but as dissolving whispers within the greater memory of the sea. For just as mountains crumble grain by grain into silt, and forests sink quietly into drowned soil, so too will we return, disassembled, diffused, remembered not in detail, but in resonance. The thought may feel unsettling at first. To dissolve is to vanish, to lose our shape. Yet when we watch waves collapse upon a beach, rolling into foam and scattering back into tide, do we call it loss? Each wave disappears, but the ocean remains. Each crest falls, but the pattern endures. Perhaps we, too, are not defined by our form, but by our participation in the larger ocean of continuities. Perhaps to dissolve into the abyss is not an ending, but a homecoming. Science, in its patient way, confirms that even in dissolution, nothing is lost completely. The atoms in our bodies, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, already lived through countless worlds before us. Some born in stars, some folded in ancient seas, some once breathed by ammonites or clasped inside trilobite shells. When our bodies return to the ocean, these atoms will not vanish. They will merge into plankton, into currents, into sediments, into stone. The ocean will weave us back into its diary, line after line, word after word, not as singular identities, but as grains of a larger story. What if this is memory's truest form? Not the persistence of the self intact, but the persistence of matter, endlessly rearranged into new patterns. We are written, but not as we imagine. We are recorded, but as residue, as echo, as chemical trace. Perhaps to seek permanence is human, but to dissolve is planetary. Maybe, just maybe, we were never meant to be remembered in detail, but diffused within the collective silence of the abyss. The deep sea mirrors this truth endlessly. Consider the rain of plankton skeletons that drift downward each night. Radiolaria, diatoms, foraminifera, so small they seem inconsequential. Yet over millions of years, they form chalk cliffs, limestones, whole continents of memory. None of them endured as themselves, but all of them endure in pattern. The individual vanished, but the collective memory became immortal. Could we be walking already upon other beings' echoes, without realizing that one day, others will stand upon ours? Even the great whale, fallen into the abyss, dissolves slowly into the food web of darkness until only bones remain. Yet even those bones fuel entire ecosystems of worms, bacteria, and fish. The whale is not lost. It is dispersed. It becomes chorus instead of solo, rhythm instead of melody. Perhaps we are the same. Perhaps beneath the ocean's patience, identity becomes less about who and more about how we dissolved, how we scattered, how we joined the tide of continuities larger than ourselves. Could it be that memory was never meant for preservation at all? Preservation, stone, fossil, isotope, is only a fraction of Earth's recalling. The truer memory is entanglement, the way every life becomes every other over deep time. The way your breath contains atoms once part of oceans long gone. The way your bones carry calcium mined by corals long extinct. Memory is not linear. It is diffusion, repetition, recombination. To accept this is to accept that we are not erased, only echoed. There is a softness in the thought that even silence carries us forward. A silence filled with whispers too faint to hear, yet never absent. Our stories may not remain in words, but in isotopic traces of atmosphere we alter, in the technofossils pressed into seabeds, in the simple nutrient loops to which our matter inevitably returns. The ocean will not keep us as we imagine ourselves, but it will keep us all the same, grain by grain dissolved into its patient archive. And so, perhaps we are meant to become the ocean's echo, not as immortality, not as legend, but as participation in a memory without clear boundaries. A memory in which ammonites and cities, forests and civilizations, whales and waves, all collapse into one another seamlessly. If the ocean's silence already holds trilobites side by side with plastic polymers, then why would we expect ourselves to be different? We too will join this strange communion, this entangled archive where value and meaning are irrelevant. Not because it rejects us, but because it holds everything at once. What does that make us, then? Fleeting individuals, yes, but also currents of continuity. Our grief, our joy, our thought may vanish as stories, but endure as resonance. Entropy will scatter us, but cannot erase the fact that for a brief moment, we were here, and that presence will echo forever, even if it cannot be recognized. To be part of the ocean's echo is to let go of permanence and embrace inclusion. Not preserved, not forgotten, absorbed. And maybe the calmest truth is this: we are already dissolving. Even now, as we breathe, our atoms exchange with air, with water, with food, with soil. Entropy is always at work, gently scattering pieces of us back into the whole. Death does not begin when our bodies end. Dissolution is constant, but constant in a way that speaks of belonging, not loss. Could it be that the self is a temporary illusion formed by cycles, and that our truer identity has always been this oceanic diffusion? Imagine it millions of years from now, the echoes of our existence will still be heard, though not as language. They will persist in isotope ratios, in faint chemical horizons showing how carbon shifted, in delicate dust embedded within cliffs. The ocean may no longer exist as we know it, perhaps drawn into new basins, perhaps buried in new mountain ranges. Yet the memory of our time, of our dissolutions, will be pressed into that deeper record. Whether remembered by another intelligence or not, it will be there. For nothing in Earth's patience vanishes entirely. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this truth is that it resists finality. The ocean's echo is not a conclusion. It is continuity stretched so thin we cannot feel it directly. It is not a mortal detail, but a mortal merging. And as we accept this, as we let our minds drift into its calm, we may realize that becoming an echo is not something to resist. It is what the planet does with everything it has ever known. And yet, if all matter, all memory, all oceans collapse into echo, if silence itself is filled only with whispers of what once was, then perhaps this is the last gift of the ocean, that we may realize we were never separate at all. We were always already waves in its body, already atoms in its chorus. The echo is not what we become. The echo is what we have been all along.